And we are in the throes of Unit 10. Most of this evening is going to be looking at our offer to purchase and contract. But before we look at the actual document, we still have a few more things to talk about. So let's go. And this is a great place to start because it allows us to kind of recap where we left off last week. So we're working our way up to talking about when this offer, we have acceptance, it's a contract. And there's this magic moment in time when it goes from being an offer to a legally binding contract. And that's what we're leading up to. That's where we're heading. Remind me, somebody or several remind me's, um, who is the offer or, and you can tell me in a chat or on mute, of course. Who is the offer or?
The seller.
The person making the offer.
It
Buyer.
could be the seller. It could be the buyer. Your test wants to know the offer or is the person making the offer. It's the giver of the offer. You remember your ORs and our EEs. Who is the offeree then?
Well, it could be the
person
seller or
who's
the
receiving
Well,
it.
based on that, it could be the
The
seller.
buyer, but the offeree is the person receiving. Please, please, please don't get bogged down in buyer or seller, because most of the time buyer's the one making the offer to the seller. But in a counter offer, we learn those roles reverse. When you guys see offer or, I want you to think the giver of the offer. When you see offeree, it's the person receiving the offer. Do I have everybody so far? The ors and the e's. Pay attention to those ORs and e's. By the way, remember that little chart? You may want to make a note. I don't think it was at the beginning of Unit 5. And it talks about the giver of a document and the receivee of a document. So we have the offer or is making an offer to the offeree. The offeree has three choices. Why don't you guys all unmute? This is always fun. Everybody on mute. The offeree has received an offer from the offeror. What are the offerees? They can
Accept,
reject,
or counter.
offer.
That was awesome. You guys can remute, and I can open that too. I can mute y'all, but I can't unmute y'all. There we go. So the offeree always has three choices. They can accept the offer. If they accept the offer, they're agreeing to all of the terms exactly the way they are. Does everybody hear me? All exactly. Any change means we don't have acceptance. You could be negotiating $1, you guys. Any change, it doesn't matter how small and insignificant, means that we do not have acceptance. If we have acceptance, we agree to all of the terms exactly the way they are. To reject an offer means that it's dead on the table. You've killed it. You've rejected it. Thanks, but no thanks. You cannot go back and revive it. Now, I think the question we had last week, you can turn around and make a brand new offer with those exact same terms. But again, the key word there is it's a new offer. So once it's been rejected, it's dead on the table. And then the third option we have is to counter. A counter offer is a rejection. A counter offer is a rejection with a but. I'm good with all these terms, but the purchase price and the closing date, for example. So we've agreed to all the other terms, but now what we are negotiating, what we are countering back and forth is those couple things or all the things or whatever. I also introduced you guys last week to our contract formation wall. We're going to look a little bit more into this tonight. And I do want you guys, as we go through this unit and this section, and you get into some of those test questions, I want you guys to draw it out on your scratch paper. You do get scratch paper for both of your exams, and I want you to draw it out because these test questions are about that long, and they walk you back and forth. There's a couple counters, and in the end, we need to know in that exact moment that this offer became a contract. So if we just revisit what we saw last week, and we're just gonna, for example, say that the buyer is making the offer. E-R-E, is that right? My spelling skills are off today. You guys are polite. Thank you. So, so the buyer is making the offer to the seller. The buyer's the offeror. And like I said, 9.8 times out of 10, this is the way it goes down. But guys, there can be cases where the seller makes an offer to sell to the buyer. So the offeror, in this case, is the buyer. They make the offer to the seller. The seller is the offeree. The seller has three choices. They can accept it, reject it, and counter it. If they counter it, the roles reverse. A counter offer reverses the roles. Now we have the seller making an offer, brand new offer, to the buyer. The offeror being the seller now, the offeree being the buyer. What are the buyer's three choices? They can accept it, reject it, counter it. If we counter it, those roles reverse again and again and again. Every single counter, and hopefully what's happening, you got the seller starting up here somewhere, you got the buyer starting here. And hopefully every counter gets us a little bit closer and a little bit closer together to the parties both being satisfied with what's on the table. Nobody is locked in, nobody is committed until we have a contract formation. Step one is we have to have acceptance. I will talk about step two next. But before I go to the next slide, I just want to pause. Does anybody have any questions so far? Offeror makes the offer to the offeree. The offeree has three choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. A counter offer reverses the roles. So let's talk about this magic moment in time. When we go from having an offer to a contract. And in order for this to happen, I have to have two things. First off, we've already said the last offeree accepts, right? The last offeree has three choices. They accept it, reject it, or counter. So step one, we have acceptance. For your exam, when you see that the offeree has accepted, know that it's been signed. Did everybody just hear me? For your exam, when you see that the last offeree accepts it, know that it's been signed. Obviously, in the real world, you want to confirm that. We will talk more about that. But for your exam, acceptance means it's been signed. I'm telling you guys right now, if you got verbal acceptance, you got nothing. So everybody good so far? Step one, we have the last offeree signs, accepts. And then communication of that acceptance has to be conveyed to the person making the offer. I'm not talking about delivery of the document. What does that say? Communication of acceptance. Communication that it has been signed. Once we have that communication, congratulations, we are under contract. So if we go back to our contract formation wall, E, seller. Okay, so back to our contract communication wall. Buyer makes an offer to the seller. We're going to bring agents into the mix in a minute too. We haven't talked about where we stand. So the buyer makes an offer to the seller. The seller has three choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter. In this case, our seller chose to counter. I'm good with all the terms, but the purchase price and home warranty. I don't want to buy you a home warranty. Anything is negotiable. And again, you guys, in just a minute, we're getting ready to go look at our contract and we're going to see those negotiable fields, the fill in the blank fields. So the seller says, I'm good with the purchase, everything but the purchase price and the home warranty. They have countered the offer. The roles have reversed. Now the seller's making a brand new offer to the buyer, and the buyer has three choices in this case. They can accept it, reject it, or counter. So let's say the buyer says, okay, I'm good with the negotiated purchase price, and I'm good with you not buying me a home warranty. So I will accept your offer. With the last offer he accepts, we know that it means that it has been signed. And then once we have acceptance, communication of acceptance must cross the line. The person making the offer, in this case, the seller, the last offer, or in this case, the seller, don't they have a right to know that their offer's been accepted? Sure. And then and only then is when we have our contract formation. Y'all see that word must? We must have two things. This is that magic moment in time. Abigail, I need you to rename yourself again, if you will, Miss User. Thank you. So we have these two things. The last offeree accepts. For your exam, we know that it's been signed. And then communication of acceptance must cross the line. Communication of acceptance must go back to the person making the offer. Again, you guys, please make a big note of that. It does not say delivery of the contract, does it? It says communication, the fact that it's been signed. Now, we're going to talk about that communication more in just 1 second. We're building up to it because I know you have a lot of questions. So just bear with me. So when you guys are going through this test question or these test questions that are like this long and they walk you through this, I need you to look for these two things. Has the last offeree accepted, and has communication of acceptance crossed the line, thank you, and gone back to the offer or. Now, before we talk more about this communication, let me throw in the broker. Let's throw us into this mix. And understand this, when it comes to contract formation, and we're dealing with the contract formation wall, communication to either party's agent is just as good as communicating with the party. We've already said buyers and sellers buy and sell houses every day without real estate agents. We are not required. Should they choose to include us, should they choose to get us involved, we are going to stand in place or on the same side, if you will, of the communication wall as our client. Let's walk through this now that we've gotten agents in the mix. Now the buyer has an agent, the seller has an agent. Agents out showing buyer property. Buyer walks in the front door and says, this is it. This is the one. The search is over. This is the home I've been looking for. Let's write it up. Buyer's agent, that's when you get to pull out your offer to purchase a contract, and you and your buyer will discuss the fields. You will discuss the terms. Which purchase price do you want to offer? There's deposits, there's fees, there's dates. There's all sorts of good stuff that we need to look at. So the agent helps the buyer in preparing their offer. The agent then has the buyer sign the offer. Doesn't that show the seller that this buyer's serious? Not only am I making you an offer, but here's my signature as well. So the buyer makes an offer to the seller. The buyer, through their agent, fills out the paperwork, fills out the offer, and have them sign. Buyer's agent communicates with the seller's agent. Buyer's agent says, hey, we got an offer. Seller's agent says, awesome. I'll discuss with my seller and get back to you. Seller's agent calls a seller and says, hey, we have an offer. Let's discuss these terms. You as the seller have three choices. You can accept this offer, you can reject this offer, or you can counter this offer. Seller says, well, I'm not good with the purchase price, and I definitely don't want to buy them home warranty. So we've created a counteroffer. Agents are communicating with each other. Seller's agent now calls buyer's agent and says, we're good with all the terms, but this and this. Buyer says, that sounds good. I accept. When they accept, what does that mean? It means, there you go, that it has been, that's right, that it has been signed. Buyer calls their agent and says, I have accepted, I have signed. When the buyer calls their agent, did that communication cross the line? Nah, we're still over here on the left, aren't we? So do I have a contract yet? Not yet. We're still on step one, aren't we? Now the buyer's agent calls the listing agent and says, my guys have accepted. Did that communication cross the line? Congratulations, folks. We are under contract. As the listing agent, what's the very next thing you're going to want to do? Seeing mouths move.
Contact your seller and let
Yeah,
them know.
that's right. Call the seller and tell them the good news. As the listing agent, once you have that communication of acceptance, you're not calling the seller now and saying, are you sure? No. This phone call is, congratulations, you are under contract to sell your house. Because communicating to us, this is negotiations, guys. Communicating to us is just as good as communicating to the party. What I need you guys to see is that moment that the last offeree accepts, and then that moment that that communication of acceptance crosses the line. And this is where I think you need to draw it out. Like I said, you get scratch paper for both of your exams. And I think you should draw it out because I'm not kidding. Some of those test questions are like this long and there's several counters. And in the end, we need to see who is the last offeree that signs and who is the last offeror that we have communication of acceptance. Questions now that we brought the agents into the mix. Again, we're going to talk about communicating next, but we just brought the agent into the mix. And guys, I'm not communicating, I'm not negotiating for them. I'm speaking on their behalf. So remember, I'm a special agent. Special agent, sales agents are special agents. And how much power, ability do I have to bind as a special agent? Nada. That's right. Exactly. So I'm not saying, oh yeah, they accept, or oh yeah, they counter. That's communicating from them to me to the other side. Let's talk about this communication of acceptance. And I do think this tends to be a problem topic. And I'll tell you why in just a second. How we communicate acceptance really doesn't matter. There's traditional methods. We could pick up the phone. One agent could pick up the phone and call the other and say, my guys have accepted. Did communication just cross the line? Did I communicate with you that my guys have signed? If you really want to go old school, you could fax it over if you can still find one of those laying around. You could snail mail it, right? Traditional methods. And then welcome to 2024. Of course, we can email it, e-signatures, text message, that kind of thing. We are not communicating. I'm not delivering the contract. We're just communicating that it has been signed. So let's go back. Let's the phone. Let's say that the buyer accepts. Buyer's agent is out and about. Buyer's agent's out running errands. Maybe they're even showing property. They call the listing agent and say, my guys have accepted. We're under contract. Now the buyer's agent, once they get back to a spot where they can safely get to their laptop, we need to get the signed contract to the other side. That's a different step. Now you can email the signed contract as your communication of acceptance, right? But if you get a phone call or a text or even an email saying my guys have accepted, As long as it has been signed, we're under contract. I will get you the signed contract later. Maybe I'm going to deliver it to your office. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is communication of acceptance, communicating the fact that it has been signed. And that's what we need to cross the line. Any form of communication is allowed as long as the parties agree to it. And when we look at our contract, we'll see we have a place how parties want to be communicated. Let's look at an example, and then I want to come back and talk about something else real quick. An owner offers to sell to a prospective buyer. The owner is the offeror in this case, the buyer being the offeree. The offer states that acceptance must be made by email message only. Instead, that buyer leaves a phone message informing the seller he's accepted and signed the offer. Is that an allowable form of communication? They didn't say, call me. They said, what they say, email only. The parties have to agree on the form of communication. Any carrier pigeon, any form of communication is okay, as long as the parties agree. I want to go back and talk about snail mail for a second. We don't deal with it much, but guys, not everybody has an email address. Let me just go ahead and put that out there. Not 100% of people have an email address yet. My 77-year-old father-in-law just got his very first email address a couple months ago, and he's still trying to figure out what to do with it. So it's a family effort. We're working with him. It's a good time. He got set up on Amazon last week too. I'm like, oh no. We got to watch that. But not everybody has an email address. So you may still get to deal with snail mail. And if you're dealing with snail mail, there's something called the mailbox rule. First off, the mailbox rule only applies when you're creating a contract. It doesn't apply when you're negotiating. It doesn't apply when you're terminating. It doesn't apply when you're making an offer. The mailbox rule only applies when you're creating a contract. And what that communication of acceptance. And what the mailbox rule says is that once the properly addressed envelope has been placed in the federally related mailbox, communication of acceptance has crossed the line. It doesn't matter that we may get it 2 days or 4 days from now. The mailbox rule says once that properly addressed envelope has hit the federally related mailbox, this is either one of those big blue boxes or you're actually taking it to the post office, communication of acceptance has crossed the line. The other thing I want you guys to be aware of, we only need communication of acceptance to cross the line once. So if we can abbreviate our story here, same story we've been working on, offer or, offer E, roles reversed, da 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 da. So we have acceptance, the last offeree has accepted, and now what we're looking for is that communication of acceptance. And your exam might say that the agent texted communication of acceptance, and then they emailed, and then they followed up with a voicemail. I only need communication of acceptance to cross the line once. Everything else is a follow-up. So we have the last offeree signed, and then they texted communication of acceptance, followed up with an email, followed up with a voicemail. Which form of communication put us under contract? That's right, the text. The first time communication crossed the line. So I could text you and say, my guys have accepted. And then I could send you an email, and then I could follow up. Everybody hear me? The email and the voicemail, I'm following up with that communication. If it goes down, the judge will be looking for date and time stamps. So what we're looking for is acceptance of the last offeree, communication of acceptance back to the offeror, and then I only need communication to cross the line one time. Everything else, we'll call it a follow-up. Some of you may call it a distractor, whatever. But they're going to give you these scenarios to make sure, because can we all agree as real estate agents knowing when it goes from being an offer to a contract is important. I mean, your buyers and sellers are relying on you to let them know when you are under contract. And so this might be one of the more important things, one of the more real life things that we talk about in this class. What questions do I have? Can the offeror change their mind once they send the offer? Yes. As a matter of fact, and we're getting here, but as a matter of fact, the offeror is free to reject their offer at any time prior to acceptance. So you could make an offer tonight, wake up tomorrow and change your mind. You could pull back your offer and make a new one if you wanted to. Back to our scenario, once we have a counter offer, the seller's now making the offer to the buyer. The seller is free to reject their offer at any time prior to acceptance. Again, you guys, we're not legally bound until we have acceptance and communication of acceptance. Now we're legally bound to each other, but not until then. Good question. Thank you. What else on this? Again, for your test, for the real world, I need you to know that it's been accepted, i.e. signed by the last offeree, and that communication of acceptance crosses the line to the last offeror. And I do encourage you to draw it out for your exams so you can see it.
Okay, quick question. I want to make sure I got this right.
Please.
If I send a email to the other agent saying, "Hey, my client signed," do I have to wait on a response from him to consider that as crossing the line as long as I sent my email? I don't
You
have to.
can,
Okay,
that's it,
what-
Rachel. You
okay,
communicated that your guys have signed, and that's a great point. If you
okay,
send me an email and say my guys have signed, it's not your fault I don't get back to my email for another 2 minutes or 2 hours, right?
okay,
As soon as I get back to my email, what am I going to see when I sit down? I'm going to see that our offer has been accepted, and that's what we're looking for. Now, I think in a perfect world, we're going to get it to him, email it to him right away. But guys, real estate agents, we're busy. And there may be times I walk out the door at 8 a.m. and I don't walk back in until 8 p.m., so you're working on the road, right? And I always want everybody to always be safe, but you may not be able to actually deliver the signed document right away. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about communicating the fact that your guys have signed. And, again, just as a side note, in the real world, yes, we need to verify that it's been signed. Because seriously, if you got verbal, you have nothing. But for our exams, let's keep this easy. Once you see it's been accepted, once you see that offeree has accepted it, communication of acceptance crosses the line, and I need you to see it cross the line. Congratulations, we're under contract. Rachel, do you have another question?
no, am I not on mute?
Making sure. You got it? Yep.
How long do they have to accept the offer?
There is no set time unless the offeror establishes a time frame. So I could give you an offer, and Ashley, and say this offer is good for 24 hours. And if you don't accept it within 24 hours, the offer's dead.
Okay.
And remember what I said, the offeror is free to reject their offer at any time. So if I'm making that offer to Ashley and it's like, 3 weeks from now and I still haven't heard from her, for example, I'm probably gonna rescind it, right? I'm gonna pull my offer back. So there is no set time unless the parties agree.
I have a question. Is it possible to have, I know you can have multiple offers out there,
Mhm.
and if there's no time frame in place for anyone to accept anything, can all of those offers still just kind of float out there until the seller decides they want to make a decision?
Yep. And we're going to talk about multiple offers in just a bit, Tink. But yeah, and with multiple offers, what you may even have is something like all offers due by Thursday at 5. So the seller, may consider an offer, but they want to keep seeing, if they want to keep seeing what they get, they know that other offers may come in until that time. Another good point of this, we just said the offeror is free to reject their offer at any time. The offeree is free to accept any offer they want at any time. So if we did put a final and best date of Thursday at 5, and the dream offer, cash, perfect, close next week comes in, we don't have to wait until Thursday at 5, because the offeree is free to accept any offer at any time. People still have a little bit of power until they accept and communication of acceptance. Now they're locked into each other. And hang on to that multiple offers, because we will come back to that. Very much a real thing these last few years. Still, you hit the right price point. We're still dealing with multiple offers, of course. But yeah, last couple years, y'all, we listed something. My team did. Hey, we listed something. We were on the market for the weekend. I don't know how many showings we had, but after the weekend, we had 45 offers. 45 offers. Can you imagine those poor sellers? That's the kind of market we're getting out of.
I know you have to present every offer, but at some point, can the sellers be like, I don't want to hear anything under this amount?
Sure. I mean, I still have to present it, right? Because I present which offers.
Oh,
So I still have to present it, but I can say, these 10 are under what you wanted. So let's just put these off to the side for now and focus on the 35 that are the price that you want. So we can kind of have these conversations, but I still have a duty to deliver all offers, even in that kind of situation. Ashley, yeah. You may want to try log out, log back in too.
In a situation where you have that many offers, like how do they pick which one they want to go with at that point?
I had sellers once, and we had 7 offers, and they were all perfect. And in everyday situation, we had nothing to counter. My sellers pretty much just went, that one. They got to pick one. They got to decide somehow how to pick one. So 45, we could kind of help them eliminate some, like those 4 or 5 that are asking for the home warranty, whatever, now we're down to, so there are things. But again, when we look at our contract in just a second, we're going to see that there's a lot of terms to consider. And I think bottom line, Jennifer, it comes down to what's most important to the seller. Is a high purchase price most important? Is it a closing date that's most important? Is it fees, deposits, whatever? And that's conversations we're having with our sellers to help them narrow that down. And that 45 offer, that was not a normal market, y'all. There was nothing normal about the market that we're getting out of. That was absurd is what that was. So now we're getting back to normal, whatever that means. Still multiple offers. My head was spinning and I wasn't even involved. I just heard about it after the fact. I was like, oh my goodness. So again, just to reiterate, I went back. We must have these 2 things for your exams. I need you to see these 2 things. The last offeree accepts, communication of acceptance crosses the line, and is told goes back to the person making the offer. So before we talk more about contract, I got one more thing to say about offer. So let's talk about how we can terminate an offer. And please note, this is still an offer. So how do we terminate an offer? Well, we just said a rejection will terminate an offer. A counter offer is a rejection, so that will terminate an offer. If there is that time limit on it, this offer is good for 24 hours, for example, that will terminate an offer. The offeree doesn't accept within that timeline or within a reasonable amount of time. Again, after, if you've gone days or weeks or whatever and you haven't heard back from anybody, then you just pull your offer back. The offeror can reject their offer at any time prior to acceptance. And then death of either party, if the buyer or seller passes away while we're in the throes of negotiations, that will terminate the offer. Fun fact, death is only an out for the offer. Once you're under contract, death is not an out. If our buyers and sellers die, the contract says the responsibility will be on their heirs. And if they can't or won't fulfill the terms of the contract, they'll suffer the consequences of breach. Death is only an out when you're negotiating an offer. Isn't that something? You have a signed contract, your intentions are clear. So let's talk specifically. We're getting closer and closer to looking at our standard offer to purchase and contract. But before we do that, let's talk about a few things. First off, our more commonly used forms come with guidelines for complete. The forms committee has provided a guidelines for complete. So just to kind of review, this isn't in your book. I'm gone off book for just a second. But just to kind of review these guidelines, when it comes to the agents completing this offer to purchase and contract, we need to type, if at all possible. If you do have to handwrite an offer, do it in pen. Pencil's not going to fly in a court of law. Purple crayon's not going to look good if it goes to the judge, So if you do have to handwrite an offer, do it legibly and do it in ink. We need to fill in all the blank spaces. The easy way I remember this is we never leave a blank blank. There's two reasons for that. One, I don't want the other side to think that I forgot to fill that in. I don't want them to think that I forgot to fill that in. The other reason, I don't want to leave it open for the other side to slide something in there. So if you have a blank that's not applicable, we can put just that, N/A, not applicable. Never leave a blank blank. We need to be precise. We talked about last week how our verbiage, our real estate jargon, does not belong in the offer to purchase and contract that binds the buyer and the sellers. All changes need to be acknowledged by all parties. So if we're changing on a document, we need to get it initialed and dated. And then we need to, as brokers, this last bullet point is probably the most important. We need to review these provisions with our parties, with our buyers and sellers. I'm telling you right now, they aren't reading the offer to purchase and contract. They trust us. Remember that fiduciary and old car and all those things you said to get them to hire you? They trust us. Guys, they don't read. Every once in a while, you'll get a reader. But for the most part, and you can hand them a sample contract and say, read this. Well, okay, I'll get to it, let you know. But I'm telling you guys, for the most part, they don't read, they trust. So we still need to have conversations with our buyers and sellers about the provisions, about what they're offering and accepting. Before we get into the offer to purchase and contract, again, I need to stay off book for just a second. But there's a couple provisions that I just want to go over with you guys before we see it played out in the contract. So I want to have a conversation about a few things that we're going to see. And the things I want to talk about, we're going to talk about something called a due diligence fee, a due diligence period, and earnest money deposit. Now, you do have this spelled out in your book, and I'll show you where in just a second. But stay off book, stay with me for just a minute. Because I think before we look at our contract, we need to understand what this due diligence fee, due diligence period, and earnest money deposit are all about. Typically speaking, there are exceptions, but typically speaking, in our vernacular, a deposit is refundable. A fee is not. Now, a fee can be refundable, but for the most part, a deposit is refundable and a fee is not. Okay. So let's talk first about the due diligence fee. Everybody hear me? Everybody with me? The DDF, due diligence fee. This is a negotiable amount upon contract formation that is paid directly by the buyer to the seller. We're going to negotiate this amount. This is typically non-refundable. It may be, there are a few cases, but for the most part, contract formation has happened and the buyer is cutting a check to the seller. Why in the world would the buyer pay the seller? The buyer is paying the seller to terminate during the due diligence period. We'll talk about that due diligence period. It's a negotiable amount of time that the buyer has to terminate. The due diligence period is the buyer's opportunity to learn as much about the property as they possibly can and decide in their sole discretion, do I want to move forward with this contract or not? And if they exercise their right to terminate within the due diligence period, they've paid, that's what they paid the seller for. In other words, the seller can't sue the buyer. They paid for that right to terminate. So what if? What if the buyer terminates within their due diligence period? You guys can shake your heads, yes or no. Do you think they'll get that fee back if they do terminate within their due diligence period? Are they getting their money back? Yeah. And the answer is no. Why? Because they paid for that right to terminate. And because they terminated, they have exercised that right. So a fee, due diligence fee, is a negotiable amount. The real estate, there's no formula. There's no, well, if the purchase price is this, then you take 10% minus. No, there is no formula. The Real Estate Commission is very helpful. And they tell us that the due diligence fee is whatever the buyer is willing to offer and the seller is willing to accept. If the buyer offers 0 and the seller accepts 0, we have formed a contract on how much due diligence fee? 0. That's what we mean by a negotiable amount. So hang on to that. Again, we're going to see it played out. Yeah.
Is the due diligence period negotiable or is it a set time?
Yep, we're going to agree. We're going to agree on the time and we're going to agree on the amount. Yep.
Julie, is it accurate to say that everything is negotiable on that end?
If it's a blank in the contract, then yes, it's negotiable. So the dates, the amounts, those are blank, which means the parties have to fill those in. Yep. Then the other money is an earnest money deposit. Again, a negotiable money, all negotiable. This time, this money goes to an escrow agent or a trust account. The escrow agent is an impartial third party. They have no interest in this money. They're just holding it on behalf of everybody. The earnest money deposit shows the buyer's good faith. It shows the seller that this is a serious buyer. They're not just out there kicking tires. They're genuinely interested in buying your home. So I got two amounts. I got a due diligence fee and we got an earnest money deposit. Knowing what we know about deposits, what do you guys think? Shake your head. If the buyer terminates, will they get their earnest money deposit back? And the answer is, well, that depends. Let's talk about what that means. The buyer's not considered in breach until after the due diligence period. The due diligence period is the buyer's right to learn as much about the property as they possibly can. The contract actually says they have the right to terminate for any reason or no reason. They could have a terrible home inspection and find electrical, plumbing, and structural issues and say, my gosh, this is too much for me to handle. I can't take all this on. I'm going to terminate. They literally could wake up the next day and say, nah, I don't want to buy this house. So that due diligence period is their right to terminate for any reason or no reason. Who can remind me what's caveat emptor mean?
Buyer beware.
Buyer beware. Since the seller doesn't have to disclose anything or do anything, isn't it only fair that the buyer gets an opportunity to learn about the property themselves? Isn't that only fair? Do you have to pay for things in life? Well, sure, nothing's for free or not much, you know? So they got to pay for that right. They're paying the seller for that right. But they're not considered in breach until after the due diligence period, because the due diligence period is that buyer's right to terminate for any reason or no reason at all. Craziest story I ever heard. One of my agents had buyers terminate because they realized, hey, it's important to them, you know, they realized the sun set in the backyard. They said they like to grill out. They plan on spending their evenings in the backyard. And as soon as they realized where the sun set, they decided that wasn't the house for them. Is that a reason? Well, they sure thought so. And the next time they went and looked at property, they had compasses with them to make sure everybody knew where the sun set. If it's important to them, then it's important to us. So if the buyer terminates within their due diligence period, they're going to get their earnest money back. If they terminate after the due diligence period, now the buyer's in breach and that earnest money deposit will go to the seller. Remember, this earnest money deposit is hanging out in some third party, impartial third party's trust account. For the buyer's breach, the due diligence fee plus the earnest money deposit are the seller's liquidated damages. Remember, we defined liquidated damages back in Unit 9. We said liquidated damages are money damages for breach, and they're monies that we agree on at the time of contract formation. That due diligence fee is a negotiable amount. That earnest money deposit is a negotiable amount. And if the buyer terminates after their due diligence period, the seller gets the liquidated damages. They will keep the due diligence fee plus the earnest money deposit. And the contract goes on and says that's their sole remedy. The seller cannot sue the buyer. All the seller can get is their due diligence fee and their earnest money deposit if the buyer's in breach. If the seller is in breach, if the seller breaches the contract, the buyer can sue the pants off of them. The buyer can go after them for compensatory damages. They can go after them for specific performance. All these contract remedies we talked about last week in Unit 9. Breach for the seller or consequences for seller breach is much harsher than buyer. We can agree with that, right? It's much harsher for the seller to breach than the buyer. And the reason being for that, you guys, the seller's the one that initiated this whole thing by putting a for sale sign in their front yard. Had they not done that, had they not made their property for sale, we never would have been here. Before we take a break, no more doom and gloom. What if this thing actually gets to closing? What if nobody breaches and we actually get to closing? It happens sometimes. That due diligence fee and the earnest money deposit are going to be credited back to the buyer as settlement. So if we make it to closing, that fee and that deposit, that's that much less they have to bring to closing. So they're not throwing money away. In a sense, they're making a deposit to determine if they want to purchase this home. And again, we're going to see this played out. We'll see definitions in the contract. I'm just introducing it to you now because I know this is kind of hard for us to wrap our brains around. Also, if we make it to closing, that due diligence fee is going to be debited from the seller. They already received it once. So now we need to debit. And again, we'll see that played out in just a second. All of this is after the loan amount has been approved. Tink, that gets really interesting. And I'm going to talk more about that. Can you hang on to that for just a minute? We'll talk more about that when we talk about the loan. There's a lot going on. I think I mentioned last week, our offer to purchase and contract as of July of 23 is 17 pages now. So we got a lot that we have to cover, a lot that we need to make sure the parties understand. And that's what you and I are going to go over when we get back from break. We're going to look at our, don't go to break just yet. Don't go to break just yet. But where we are now is looking at our standard offer to purchase and contract. Aside from the seller breaching, is there another time when the buyer can get their earnest money deposit back? So the buyer will get their earnest money back if they terminate within due diligence. There are a couple other exceptions that we'll look at with our contract. So again, that's going to spell it out for us, and we'll see that in just a second. I want you guys to make a note. In Unit 10, on mine, it's starting on page 292. And the whole way to 304 discusses some of these more important terms that we're going to look at in the contract. So you guys have, what I just say, 292 to 304 as a reference. Some of you are old book people, and you may not have, there's a really good edition about the earnest money. So I'm going to, I have a copy of that. I'm going to put that in the online learning system. I need to make a note to remember to do that because I want you guys to have access to that. But we'll look at that in just a second. So let's go ahead and take our break. And when we come back, we're jumping right into standard form 2T, offer to purchase and contract. Cameras are on. Going to take attendance. We're just going to jump right in. Oop, a couple of you just came back. I've just taken attendance. If you'll just let me know in the chat. When in doubt, just let me know. So we're going to look now at our standard offer to purchase and contract. This is not the only one we're allowed to use. This is just one of the ones provided to us. This also happens to be probably the most commonly used offer to purchase and contract. It's in the Unit 10 material in the online learning system. And just like our agency agreements, I've highlighted the terms that are spelled out in the syllabus. So to help you kind of focus on what to study, what to look over. So this is I should say, an offer to purchase and contract. And off the bat, I want us to recognize that this serves two purposes. It serves as an offer to purchase, and upon acceptance becomes a contract. So once we have acceptance, we have this contract. And again, it comes with the guidelines to complete. The first provision of our offer to purchase and contract is the terms and definitions. And we spend the first 2.5 pages defining things. At a minimum, if you're not going to do anything else with the offer to purchase and contract, at a minimum, I suggest looking at the first 2.5 pages because it defines these terms throughout the contract. The first thing we have to define is who are the parties to the contract. Who is the seller and who is the buyer? I need full legal names of all parties. All those sellers that have to show up to sign the deed and their spouses, all the parties that have to convey, all the people that are going to buy, probably and their spouses. We need full legal names of everybody. Then we're going to define the property. The property we're going to select will or will not include a manufactured home, will or will not include an off-site or separate septic lot, boat slip, garage, parking space, etc. We have placed here for the street address, city, zip, and county. It's a North Carolina form for North Carolina property, so they go ahead and fill the state in for us. And then we're looking for the rest of the legal description of the property. And you can see that we're told to complete all applicable fields. And again, if they're not applicable, then put an NA in it. So what's the plat reference, the plat block and section, subdivision, plat book and page, tax ID, deed book and page, etc. Again, your firm will help you know where to get all this information so you can fill this in. Then we're going to define the purchase price. Before we define the purchase price, though, I want to go through and define some other words. So we're going to come back to this section in just 1 second. Just 1 second. As we've noticed too, the bottom of the page of our NCAR forms remind us that only realtors can use this form. The contract is jointly approved. There's the North Carolina Association of Realtors. Again, all of our forms come from NCAR, the North Carolina Association of Realtors, but it was also jointly approved by the North Carolina Bar Association. So attorneys and the forms committee created these forms for us to use. Remember, we are not creating legally binding documents. Attorneys do that. There's our Equal Housing Opportunity logo. And then it's telling us this is standard form 2T. And when its last revision is, remember what you have in your book is out of date. So the most current will always be in the online learning system. This is about the purchase price, so we'll come back. We're coming back to that. Let's define the earnest money deposit. Now we may have initial earnest money. We may have additional earnest money. It's just a matter of when it's due. Is it due now at the time of contract formation, or are we going to negotiate it to be due at a different time? No matter when it's due, it's still considered earnest money. And it is paid or required to be paid in connection with this transaction. It's going to be deposited and held in an account by the escrow agent. The earnest money shall be credited to the buyer at closing or dispersed as required by this contract. We will see the different ways that it can be dispersed. This contract spells it out for us. So now that we have very briefly defined the earnest money, now we need to define who's going to hold it. Who's going to be that escrow agent? Only those with a trust account or an escrow account can hold earnest money deposit. Some real estate firms may act as the escrow agent, but we're seeing that less and less. And what we're dealing with now, most of the time, our closing attorney will act as the escrow agent. But wherever the parties agree that we're going to let this earnest money deposit hang out, that impartial third party, we need not the name of the individual, but of the firm. So it's not the individual agent, but it would be the real estate firm. It's not the individual attorney, it's the law firm. This blue note is addressing what happens if the earnest money becomes in dispute. It's only going to be in dispute when this contract gets terminated. And the dispute's going to be who's supposed to get it. So let's back up for a second. Remember, we said if the buyer terminates within their due diligence period, they'll get their earnest money back. If they terminate after due diligence, now the seller gets it. We're going to see that spelled out. But here's the key. No matter where we are when we terminate, still in due diligence or outside of due diligence, the parties have to agree to release it. And if the parties aren't agreeing to release it, remember the escrow agent is an impartial third party. So they're not able to pick up the contract and decide what can happen, what should happen to the earnest money. So if the parties aren't in agreement of what happens to it, then it's in dispute. And if they can't settle it at some point in time, and I don't remember how long, that's not important, but at some point in time, the escrow agent turns it over to the court of competent jurisdiction, and the two parties can go downtown to the clerk of court's office and hash it out. So if the earnest money's in dispute, the escrow agent has no say-so in what happens whatsoever. The best they can do, if the parties can't come to an agreement, the best they can do is just turn it over and let the two go downtown and handle it. The earnest money may be held by the escrow agent in an interest, where's my highlighter? An interest-bearing account. The escrow agent can have an interest-bearing account as long as we have the parties agree to it. If they make interest off of your money, that's their money. They can use that for their operations. Still defining things. The effective date. The contract defines the effective date as the date that the last one has signed, and two, such signing is communicating to the party making the offer. So remember what we just said a few minutes ago. What are our two musts? We must have the last offeree sign or accept, and then that communication must cross the line. That is also known, that is our effective date. That's the date that this contract became effective. And the contract spells out for us that we have to have those two things. Most of the time, these two steps happen on the same day. We negotiate, we agree, and we communicate all on the same day. But what if it's late at night and you're in the throes of negotiations and we get the last one to sign at 11:50 p.m. and communication doesn't cross the line until 12:10 a.m. tomorrow? When's our effective date? Tomorrow, because that's when we have both steps. So if you're a late night, you're in the throes of negotiation in the middle of the night, just keep your eye on the time, because that effective date can be important. See if there's anything there worth Then, still defining things, we're going to define the due diligence fee, and the due diligence period. So let's break these down. Due diligence is the buyer's opportunity to investigate the property, including, but not limited to paragraph 4 below, which we'll see, to decide whether the buyer, in the buyer's sole discretion, will proceed with or terminate this transaction. This is a direct result of caveat emptor. If we don't have to disclose anything to the buyer, if we don't have to tell them the buyer problems, the only way to be fair is to give them an opportunity for them to find the problems, for them to investigate the property, and then decide in their sole discretion if they're going to go ahead and buy it or if they're going to terminate. I know we think the buyer's losing money because they paid for a home inspection. Let's say they paid for a $600 home inspection to find out that there's $15,000 worth of problems, immediate problems in the home. The buyer may not want to deal with that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. That's their sole discretion. But is it worth the $600 home inspection to learn about these other things, these $15,000 that you're avoiding? And that's what we're doing. We're giving them the opportunity to learn as much about the property as they possibly can to decide how and if they want to proceed. Then we get into the due diligence fee, which is a negotiated amount, completely up to buyer and seller. You guys, there is no formula. I know this is hard for new agents because you guys want some kind of help. You want some kind of, well, there's got to be some kind of rhyme or reason, like 10%. It's whatever the buyer's willing to offer and the seller's willing to accept. Buyer's agents, you need to have these conversations with your buyers and ask them, what are you willing to lose? What is your risk tolerance? Listing agents, we need to have the same conversation with the sellers. What would you consider relevant? What would you consider something that could hold the buyer to this? So it's a completely negotiated amount, if any, paid by the buyer to the seller with this contract for the buyer's right to terminate for any reason or no reason during the due diligence period. Now let's slow down and look at that in this line. This is driving me nuts. So let me fix that. Paid by the buyer to the seller. Okay. What the buyer is paying the seller for is the right to terminate. For what reason? Any reason or no reason at all, as long as they do so during the due diligence period. There's a very common misconception out there that the buyer's paying the seller to take the home off the market and not allow any more showings. Guess what? Even though we're under contract, the seller can still allow showings. The seller can accept a backup offer if they want to, which we will talk about later in Unit 10. The seller doesn't have to take their home off the market. That's not what the buyer's paying for. They're paying for the right to terminate for any reason or no reason during the due diligence period. The due diligence fee shall be the property of the seller upon the effective date. It's going to be a credit to the buyer at closing. It's non-refundable except, and we got a couple situations where it might be except. The biggest reason why it might be refunded is if the seller's in breach. If the seller's in breach, the buyer may be able to go back, may be able to collect that. And then the due diligence period begins on the effective date and goes through 5 p.m. on whatever date we negotiate. I mean, that's pretty specific right there, right? Due diligence up is 5 p.m. on this date. Time being of the essence. Who can remind me what time being of the essence means in a contract?
It has a time limit on it, right?
Has a time limit. It's a drop dead date and time. So in other words, what we're saying is the buyer has until 5 p.m. on this date to terminate for any reason or no reason. If they terminate at 5:01, they are in breach. Drop dead date and time, 5 p.m. on this date. The length of time for the due diligence period is again completely negotiable. I think a lot of it depends on the market we're in. Buyers agents, we need to make sure that we have enough time for our buyers to be able to investigate the property. We want to be able to have the home inspection done. We want to have the appraisal done. We want to get some of these tests and inspections done. And doesn't it stand to reason that if you, the agent, are busy, then your home inspector is probably busy, your pest inspector, your surveyor, all these things that we're having inspected. So buyers agents, you want to make sure that you're communicating with your village, with your people, and making sure you're getting enough time for your buyer to conduct these inspections and investigations. But all completely negotiable. So let's see, is it possible to extend the due diligence period before it expires? Yes. The parties can agree. The buyer can always ask, does the seller have to agree to do so? They don't have to. They could choose not to. So we've already agreed to this date. And remember, anything's negotiable. And that does include even once we're under contract. So we can try to renegotiate, but the seller's under no obligation. What might make the seller agree to more time?
Money.
Money.
Money. The seller might say, fine, I'll give you 2 weeks, but you know what? I want more due diligence fee. So this is what I mean. We are back in round 2 of negotiations because now we're trying to get more time and more money. Everybody with me? So it's all, you can ask. You can ask. The worst the seller can say is no. Good question. Thank you. Anything else about our due diligence fee, or due diligence period? Still defining things. We're going to define settlement date, and closing. And just, we'll see each of these, but I have a confession for you guys. We talk about closing, of confession. You all want to know the truth? I have never attended closing. You all, if you bought or sold a house, you have never attended closing. We don't attend closing. Before we talk about that, let's talk about what we do attend. What we attend is referred to as settlement. Now, once you get licensed, you'll call it closing because we all do. It's a bad habit. But for your exams, I need you to know that there is a difference. Settlement is the proper execution and delivery of the closing attorney of all documents necessary to complete this transaction, and the closing attorney's receipt for all funds necessary to complete the transaction. Settlement is when we all go to the closing attorney's office, buyer and seller go to the closing attorney's office and sign their paperwork. When they sit down, anybody bought a house in the last, 12, 13 years? You probably had a stack of paperwork about this thick plopped down in front of you, and you thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get out of here. I tell my buyers to warm up their signing hand. Sellers don't have as much to sign. We're going to get more into that paperwork in Unit 21. But settlement is when we all go to the attorney's office to get the paperwork signed. The buyer will have to bring their closing costs. If the seller owes any money, then they have to bring that closing money as well. So settlement is when the attorney gathers the information. We have to agree on a settlement date. The settlement date is going to be after due diligence. How long after due diligence? It depends. This is all negotiable. Could be a week or two. Could be longer, could be less. Usually we need you know, a little bit of time after due diligence, but before settlement. You will also note the settlement date does not have a time being of the essence. And the reason being is because delays in settlement just happen. Delays are common. And as a matter of fact, they're so common, we have a built-in delay in paragraph 12 that we will look at in just a bit. So settlement is when we all attend the attorney's office. I'm going to go with my client because I'm going to be with them there to the end. Closing is what happens when we leave the attorney's office. Closing is what happens when the attorney puts the finishing touches on it. Closing is defined as settlement. The completion of a satisfactory title update. Remember, we talked about title insurance, researching the public documents so that the attorney can get their good opinion on title. The closing attorney's receipt of all the funds. This would be the money from the lender. And then the very last act, the very last thing to happen in closing is recording the buyer's brand new deed, recording it at the Register of Deeds. Then and only then is it a done deal. So the very last act, the very last thing to happen, once it's all been satisfied, 1, 2, and 3, the attorney records the buyer's new deed in the appropriate county register of deed. It's going to be the county where the property is located. If the buyer comes with a lender, there's going to be a deed of trust, which in North Carolina is our mortgage. So the attorney will record that as well. Upon closing, the proceeds of the sale will be dispersed in accordance to the settlement statement. Nobody gets paid, and that includes me and you, until it closes, until that deed is recorded. The seller doesn't get paid, agents don't get paid, lender, attorney, nobody gets paid until it closes. Again, everybody tries really hard for settlement and closing to happen at the same time on the same day. But understand, things happen. Does the internet go down sometimes? Does the power go down sometimes? If anything happens that prevents the attorney from recording the new deed, then we don't have closing until that's done. By the way, most counties are doing e-recording now, which means they just sit there and hit a button and then wait for confirmation from the Register of Deeds that it's been accepted. Agents, when this happens, we're going to get an email from the attorney, and it's my favorite email in this industry. It's short, sweet, and to the point. It says, "We are on record." That's when you know it's a done deal. Go back and get your firm's check. Questions on the difference of settlement and closing? So when does the buyer have access to the property? At closing. That's it. It's not there until it's a done deal. And it's not a done deal until that deed is recorded. It's still the seller's property until that deed is recorded. Theoretically, we go to settlement, do our thing, leave, and then get an email. Wait on an email. And all attorneys are different. Some record a couple batches a day. Some wait till the end of the day. Some may record, you know, hey, can you give me 10 minutes? All attorneys are different. So once you start working with your preferred attorneys, you'll know their system. This warning here is just reminding us that in North Carolina, real estate closings are handled by attorneys. We're going to get, again, more into the contract to closing process when we get into Unit 21. But North Carolina is a settlement agent state. which just means that we have settlement agents, we have closing attorneys that handle the process. Other states may be an escrow state, meaning they have like the lien or the title company handling the process. And I think that's important for us because you very well may be working with a buyer that's moving here from another state. And if they're not used to the way we do it, they may look at you and say, do I have to hire an attorney? And our answer is, if the property is located in the state of North Carolina, yes. And that's what that red warning is reminding us about. The last thing we're going to define is special assessments, which we already have. It's just a charge against a property, either by a governmental authority or an owner's association. So the government may put down a special assessment. It's an improvement to the property. So maybe they're going to install sidewalks or street lights. Maybe the owners association has a special assessment to redo the roofs in the condominium complex. Right now, we're just defining what a special assessment is. We're going to see later what our blue note there is telling us. We're going to see later what's the buyer's responsibilities for special assessments and what's the seller's responsibilities for special assessments. So now that we've defined some things, let's go back and talk about this purchase price and how this is foreseen. And we'll start with it big and then make it little so we can see the whole thing. So back up on page 1, we need to define the purchase price. And the first line there is going to be the amount of money that the buyer is offering the seller, the offeror is offering the offeree. What is the purchase price of the property? And then we have fees and deposits that we need to deduct from the sales price. So after we define the purchase price, the sales price, we have the due diligence fee, once again, made payable and delivered to the seller on the effective date. By how? Is it going to be cash, personal check, etc.? Then we have earnest money. We have initial and we have additional. Understand, it's all earnest money. It's just a matter of when we negotiate the due date. Initial earnest money is payable and delivered to the escrow agent within 5 days of the effective date. And again, how? Additional earnest money is made payable and delivered to the escrow agent no later than 5 p.m. on this date, time being of the essence. So if we agree for additional earnest money, we also need to agree on a drop dead date and time. Whatever date, if the additional earnest money is not delivered by 5 p.m. on that date, the buyer could be in breach. The seller could choose to act on that. We'll see that in a second. So we have our due diligence fee, our earnest money, however the parties want to agree. You may also have, we'll talk a little bit about a loan assumption. This would be if the buyer is assuming the seller's loan. If the buyer's assuming the seller's loan, they're taking over the seller's loan payment. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into finance. The seller could be acting as the bank, seller financing. If it's new construction, we could be looking at a building deposit. I want to point out to you guys, one thing I like a whole lot about our forms, when the need arises for us to use an addendum, the contract tells us. It reminds me, hey, you're doing a building deposit, don't forget to attach the new construction addendum standard form 2A3-T. Hey, you're doing an assumption, don't forget to attach this form. As I've mentioned, you guys, I'm such a big fan of being familiar with the forms because it helps us know what we need to do. I don't know of a case where we're going to have all of these deposits and fees, but you can see here we have the option. Let me make this small just a minute so we can see overall what we're looking at here. So we start with our purchase price, and I'm just going to kind of make numbers up. So we have $100,000 sales price. We negotiate, again, I'm just making numbers up, 1,000 for due diligence, 1,000 for earnest money, and maybe we do 1,000 for additional earnest money due at the end of the month. 20, it's a leap year, isn't it? So yes, 29. I was trying to be smart. That's what I get. So, and we're not doing assumption. Remember, we're not leaving a blank. We're not doing seller financing, and we're not doing new construction. So what we have here is an agreement for the buyer to pay the seller $100,000. 1,000 of that's going to go towards the due diligence fee. 1,000 is going to go towards additional earnest money. 1,000, that should be another zero there, is going to go towards additional earnest money. So then the last line here is the balance due. If we make it to closing, this due diligence and earnest money will be credited back to the buyer. So what I'm telling you is I agree to give you $100,000 to buy your home. I'm giving you $3,000 in fees and deposits. So now on closing day, I only owe you $97,000. It'll be credited back to the buyer at closing. And again, all that's going to be played out. More to come when we get into Unit 21. But you can just kind of see that top line minus all the lines in between must equal that balance, that bottom line there. Questions? Anything on due diligence, earnest money? Let me recap now that we've seen it. Due diligence is very rarely refundable. There are a few exceptions. The biggest exception would be if the seller's in breach. Remember, they're the ones that initiated this whole thing to begin with by putting a for sale sign in their front yard. So unless the seller breaches, that'll be the seller's to keep. They get it on the effective date, a check made out to them. I tell my sellers, get it in the bank. I need to make sure that thing doesn't bounce. We'll look at what happens if it does. If the buyer terminates during due diligence, the seller's going to keep the due diligence fee. That's what the buyer paid for. Earnest money shows the buyer's good faith. It shows the seller that the buyer's serious. If the buyer terminates within due diligence, they'll get their earnest money back. All they stand to lose during due diligence is their due diligence fee, that right to terminate. If the buyer terminates after due diligence, now they are in breach. The seller will keep the due diligence fee and get the earnest money deposit. We'll see remedies for both parties at the end of the contract.
I'm a little confused.
Okay.
So at settlement, closing, no.
Closing.
Okay, so we're filling out this contract. We
Mhm.
know that the due diligence amount was 1,000, earnest money was 1,000, additional was 1,000. So I know you just said that all of that will be taken off of the purchase price at settlement. So where does all of the breaching fall in? Because if
If
everything
we don't make it to settlement, that's the key.
Say again?
If we don't make it to settlement,
Okay,
if
But
we
if
don't
we
make
do?
it to settlement, somebody breached the contract.
okay. And if we
And
do
then
make it to settlement, that's when all of that comes off.
That's right. That's right. It's like they're prepaying. The buyer's prepaying. I'm going to just go ahead and give you $3,000 now. If I make it to settlement, I only owe $97,000. If I don't, these are the consequences of breach. And we got remedies for breach for both parties near the end. You know, let's think about this from the seller's perspective. remember we said there's a period of time between due diligence and settlement, due diligence period and settlement. What is that period of time? Well, it's negotiable. It could be a couple weeks. It could be, month, whatever. It's all negotiable. But from the seller's point of view, the closer and closer we get to settlement, the more they got to find somewhere to live, right? The buyer's not trying to get roommates. They are kicking this person out of their home. So they have to make arrangements to live somewhere else. Have they entered into a contract to buy a house? Have they signed a year lease? And if the buyer terminates after due diligence, the seller's got to break a contract possibly. Everybody with me? Because they got to make those arrangements to live. So the closer and closer to settlement we get, the more, I don't want to say this, the more real it gets. And the seller's making these arrangements. Everybody's hiring the movers, right? I mean, there's a lot going on to make this happen. And if the buyer breaches, let's say the buyer never shows up to closing, they just don't make it to settlement for whatever reason. They wake up that morning and say, "Nah, I'm not going to buy that house." The seller's stuck in a contract somewhere, either a contract to buy or a contract for lease. So listing agents, when these offers come in, we need to make sure that the seller is good with the due diligence and the earnest money amounts, because that's all they get if the buyer breaches. Is there a benefit for representing either buyer or the seller? Some of you may discover that you have your own preference. I recommend working with both at first to see if you like one better than the other. I know when I did sales, I always said I was hungry and I didn't care, so you may work with both. You may find a niche, but I suggest kind of, playing around and seeing what you take, what you gravitate to. Y'all want to know my horror story? I wasn't too far off when I said the buyer. Mine called me 3 hours before settlement. Said, "Julie, we're not coming to the attorney's office today." Remember, I said, I'm naive. And I said, "Oh no, when do you want to close?" And he said, "Julie, we're not buying this house." You talk about being hit like a ton of bricks. I was in the process of getting in a car. I hit my head on the car when I heard that. So that, add that on top of that. They woke up that morning and changed their mind. And guys, all the seller got, they kept the due diligence. They lost their earnest money deposit. This was 3 hours before settlement. That was a bad day. I don't know another way to put that. That was a bad day in real estate. We took a break. A couple days later, we went back out and started looking again, find the one that the buyer did want to buy. Eventually got them closed, but they just didn't want, I can't make anybody do anything, right? What are you going to do? Hog time and put them in the trunk of your car and drive them to the attorney's office? Yeah, it doesn't work like that. If they refuse to go, it was a bad day. Another lesson, y'all don't spend that commission check until you have it. I'm just saying.
So what was the seller's reaction?
They, I don't know. I only talked to the agent and she was like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, okay." So I don't know. That was it. We hung up the phone. I never talked to her again. She's like, "Thanks for letting me know." I was like, "You're welcome." I was a little surprised by her reaction. I'm not going to lie. I guess she's had that happen more often than what I had.
How long had you been doing real estate at that point?
4 or 5 years, something like that. And Kayla, to your point, that day, at that time, when I got that phone call, I said I was getting in a car. I was out with a brand new agent. She had just gotten her license that week, and her and I were out previewing properties. This was like her first act as a real estate agent. She heard my end of the phone call. She's still in it, by the way. She was a trooper, but yeah, it was like her first day on the job, and she we got that call. She says I handled it well. I don't know. It's kind of all kind of a blur, you know, those moments replay in your mind. I remember my head hurt. Every once in a while, because we still work together. Every once in a while, she'll look at me and say, "Do you remember?" Yes, yes, I remember. I do. I can't make anybody do anything, you know? This paragraph here at the top of page 2 is addressing what happens if the due diligence fee or the earnest money are late. Again, I'm going to go back up just for 1 second. The contract tells us that the due diligence is due on the effective date. Earnest money is due within 5 days of the effective date. So they tell us specifically when they're due. So what happens if they're late or if the funds have been dishonored, i.e. those checks bounce? And bottom line, what happens? The seller has to provide written notice to the buyer, in which case they have 1 banking day to deliver readily available funds, cash, bank check, wire transfer, etc. So if the due diligence or the earnest money are late or bounce, the seller provides written notice to the buyer, and we do have a form for this that we can complete. Upon receiving that written notice, the buyer has 1 banking day to deliver those readily available funds. If they don't deliver the funds on time, seller shall have the right to terminate. So if the buyer can't get it together for the due diligence and the earnest money, they could be giving the buyer an out. Questions? First 2.5 pages, we just defined things. Again, if you're not going to do, I think you guys should look through the whole thing, but if you're not going to do anything else with it, I've encouraged you to focus on terms and definitions, especially the due diligence, earnest money. Okay. Second provision are our fixtures and exclusions. We talked about fixtures a couple times now. We also saw the infamous fixture list when we looked at our listing agreement. So this exact same list shows up in the listing agreement, so we can have these conversations with the seller before. But now here we are at contract formation. So the fixture list shows up again. Other items that do not convey. If the seller's going to take a fixture that the buyer sees. Now, remember we said in a perfect world, the seller would take the fixture down before I ever show up for picture day and before we ever list it. But if the seller's not going to take it down, if the buyer sees it, then we need to make sure that we exclude it because it's not going to convey. The buyer's going to take it with them. I'm sorry, the seller's going to take it with them. Seller must repair any damage caused by the removal of the fixtures in a good and workmanlike manner. Buyer or seller will inform buyer upon completion. Will I put that in writing? Absolutely. And that's what we're doing right here. Other items that do not convey, we're putting it in. So the fixtures that the sellers are going to take. Remember our parole evidence rule? The final written word will prevail. Then we also have a place for personal property. So if the parties agree that the seller is going to leave any personal property, now we're back to that refrigerator, for example, the washer dryer are probably the number 2 negotiable items. But remember, guys, anything's negotiable. I can't tell you how many times I've shown property and there's been some kind of nice sports car in the garage and the buyer says, does the car come with it? And my answer to them is always, anything's negotiable. I'm sure money talks, you know? So if we negotiate this personal property, then it needs to go in here. I need you guys to be specific. Do not just put the refrigerator. What brand is it? What does it look like? Can you get your hands on a model number? Sometimes when you open those double doors, you can see a model number on the inside door. Get as much information. Guys, there have been stories upon stories. Agents put in the fridge, buyer goes to buy, closing happens, deed gets recorded, buyer walks in the front door of their brand new house, and in the kitchen is like a 2-story dorm room or 2-shelf dorm room fridge. Did the seller do what they were contractually obligated to do? Did they leave a fridge? Yeah. What if you put refrigerator and they take out the one in the kitchen and they leave you the little beer fridge from the garage? Probably without the beer. They're going to clear it out, right? Before they move it to the garage. Is that what they had in mind? So buyer's agents, especially, I need you to be specific. Don't just say refrigerator, say Whirlpool, stainless steel, double door, da 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 da. And again, if you can get your hands on the make and model number. This blue note is just telling us that any property will be part of the sale, should be identified. Buyers advised to consult with their lender about personal property. The lender is giving the loan to buy a house, not stuff. So if that personal property list starts adding up, the lender may have an issue. I mean, think about it. Most cases, they're giving you a 30-year loan. And it's hard to buy a John Deere green tractor on a 30-year loan, you know? So the lender's job is to give money to buy the property. So this is just letting us know, refrigerator, washer, dryer. But if we start negotiating that car and the furniture, I mean, I've had buyers walk in houses before and say, this dining room is perfect. Can we get it with the dining room furniture? I mean, what a compliment to the seller, you know? But if we start negotiating more, we may want to do an outside bill of sale, have a separate negotiation between the buyer and the seller. So the lender's only funding for the property. Questions on fixtures and personal property?
Julie, I had a question about what we were just talking about, but I couldn't get myself off of mute. Okay, when you said deliver, you have one day, well, it has to be delivered and they have one day. That's from my hand to theirs, not through mail. Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So it says buyer shall have one banking day after written notice. So how do we get that written notice? That doesn't matter. But once they receive that written notice, that's when their 1-day clock starts. Yep. Yep. So if you want to email it to me, stick it in the mail, right? Drop it by my office. That's 1 day from written notice. Anything else so far? It's good stuff, isn't it? Lots more to say, but first we need a break. So let's take 10. I know I'm a little early, but before we get in this next section. So let's take 10. We come back. We're going to talk about the buyer's due diligence period. Welcome back. I am taking attendance. Oh, you guys are good. Taking attendance now. And continuing on. Provisions 4, 5, and 6 are all about the buyer. So buyer's agents, remember, said we need to go over these points, we need to go over these terms. These are the conversations we're having specifically with our buyers. Now, 4 is the buyer's due diligence process, and this is most of what Unit 21 is about. So we're going to look at this briefly, and then Noah, we're going to talk more about it. But I do want to look at this big red warning under the buyer's due diligence process. Buyers strongly encouraged to conduct due diligence during the due diligence period. If the buyer is not satisfied with the results, buyers should terminate this contract prior to the expiration of the due diligence period, unless they can obtain a written extension from the seller. Seller is not obligated to grant that extension. Again, we can always ask, but the seller doesn't have to give us more time. We've already decided something that may make the seller agree to give us more time is if we offer them more money. After due diligence, the buyer is still investigating the property. They're usually investigating it up until settlement. We're going to talk about the final walkthrough again, just a second. Remember, they're not giving up their right to learn about the property during due diligence. The only thing they lose when due diligence is over is the right to terminate. So they're still inspecting and investigating this property. Buyer's failure to deliver a termination notice prior to the expiration of the DDP will constitute a waiver by the buyer of any right to terminate. Buyer may still exercise a right to terminate if the seller fails to materially comply with their obligations, et cetera, et cetera. So the big red warning talks about that right to terminate, still investigate, still learning. And then we're going to talk about the things that the buyer should consider inspecting and investigating during the due diligence period. And first up is the loan. Now, I got 2 whole units coming about the lender next. Once we finish 10, we're going to start on unit 14 on Thursday. So we'll talk about this loan. The loan process is the longest part of the contract to closing process. So buyer's agents, we want to get this lender started on their process. Like as soon as we have an official contract, do your mini celebratory dance. Woo, and then I need you to immediately get a contract and copy this contract to the lender so they can start their thing. The note is telling us there's no loan or appraisal contingency. So if we find out after due diligence that the buyer's not going to get loan approval, the buyer's in breach, they'll have to terminate, and the seller will get the earnest money deposit. There is no loan contingency. Question came in earlier, specifically about this. And this is what I know from experience. In all my years, I've only known one buyer that has gotten final loan approval while we are still in due diligence. That's very, very rare. Usually, we don't have that final loan approval until a couple days prior to settlement. However, in due diligence, we can get the appraisal ordered. We'll talk more about that. We can get the lender to send it through the first round of underwriting. Once it comes out of the first round of underwriting, we have a pretty good idea if we're going to get loan approval or not. No guarantee, but the lender should be able to let the buyer know, especially as we're getting closer to the end of the due diligence period. And the lender should be able to let the buyer know if this is looking good or not. If it's not looking good, the buyer would want to consider terminating while we're still in due diligence. If the lender says everything's fine, I just need a couple more documents, then we got this pretty good idea But that's kind of risky for the buyer. I mean, let's face it, buying a house is risky. There's risks involved. So it's going to be awfully rare that we have that loan approval, but we can get some of the way through the process within the due diligence period to determine, for the lender to determine if we're comfortable moving forward or not. Questions on that? And again, more on that next couple units. 14 and 15 are our financing units. Then we want the buyer to investigate the property. All the property investigation is at the buyer's expense. It's money that they pay to conduct all their desired tests, surveys, appraisals, investigations, examinations, and inspection. And then you can see here, it kind of gives us a list with some descriptions. So the inspection, the home inspection, reviewing of the documents. If it's in an owner's association, there's our covenants. Homeowners insurance, the lender is going to have to approve whatever homeowners insurance policy the buyer selects. So we want the buyer to talk to a homeowners insurance company while we're in due diligence to make sure that the homeowners insurance doesn't tip them over their allowable amount. Appraisal, there's our survey, zoning, government regulations, compliance. Is the property in a flood hazard? Finding out utilities, there's our streets, if they're public or private. I know I'm going fast, but again, we're going to spend more time when we get to unit 21, and then special assessments. Understand about this list with the property investigation. This is not an inclusive list. This just helps get the buyer started. Guys, remember, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. So if they want to inspect or investigate something as their agent, my answer is, okie doke, let's do it. Please never look at a buyer and say, oh, you don't have to worry about that. That's fine. They are the ones buying this house. And if they want it inspected or investigated, then we're going to help them do it. So this list just kind of helps us get started. Anything off this list, let's do it. The buyer may have to sell or lease an existing property. This is not a contingency. As a matter of fact, it says this contract is not conditioned upon the sale or lease. However, what this is saying is that the buyer does have to sell or lease an existing property in order to buy the sellers, then they should have that sold or leased out prior to the end of the due diligence period, or be reasonably satisfied that it's going to take place. If they find out after the due diligence period that the sale of their home or the lease of their home isn't going to go through, they'll have to terminate and they will be in breach. Remember, we have no built-in contingencies. The parties can agree to add one, but there are no built-in contingencies. Repair improvements. Buyer acknowledges and understands the following. Buyer, unless the parties agree otherwise, here it is. This property is being sold in its current condition. This property is being sold as is, unless agreed otherwise. Seller may, but is not required to engage in negotiations for repairs or improvements. Once the buyers have their inspections done, they are welcome to ask the seller to do repairs. The seller can either agree to do all the repairs, none of the repairs, or some of the repairs. We're back in negotiations. We're round 2 of negotiations again. If the seller says, no, I'm not fixing anything, I'm not even going to change a light bulb for you, that's their right. They don't have to do anything, because what's the contract say? That the property is being sold in its current condition, burnt out light bulb and everything. You guys with me? If the seller agrees to do anything, we got a form for that. And once the seller signs, then they'll be contractually obligated to do that repair, whatever we agree to. If the seller's not going to fix anything, the buyer now has a decision to make. Now knowing what I know, do I want to move forward with or terminate this transaction? We need to be asking for repairs while we're still in due diligence. Because if the seller says no, the buyer has a decision to make. We can ask for, agree to, and have signed off on any repairs while we are still in due diligence. The repairs themselves don't have to be completed until prior to settlement. But we do need everybody's agreement to do any negotiated repairs while we're still in due diligence. Buyer's obligation to repair damage. Buyer shall, at the buyer's expense, promptly repair any damage to the property resulting from any activities of the buyer's agents and contractors. So if the home inspector damages the property, for example, and the buyer terminates, they're still on the hook to fix the property. They can't just walk away and leave the seller with damaged property. Indemnify, buyer's going to indemnify and hold the seller harmless from other loss, damages, claims, etc. Basically what that paragraph is saying is that, you know, anything else that you can think of, you may not be able to sue, you may not be able to go after. So we're going to hold the seller harmless unless it's covered here in the contract. We're going to indemnify and hold them harmless. Provided that the buyer has delivered any agreed upon due diligence fee. Buyer shall have the right to terminate, here it is again, this contract for any reason or no reason. Have the right to terminate during the due diligence period, that time being of the essence. If the buyer timely delivers that notice of termination, this contract shall be terminated and the earnest money deposit shall be refunded to the buyer. Again, if the buyer terminates for any reason or no reason during due diligence, all they have to do is provide written notice of termination. They don't even have to tell the seller why they're terminating if they don't want to. All they have to do is provide written notice of termination. And yes, we have forms for that. And upon assuming that it's been received by the seller, by the end of the due diligence period, time is of the essence, the earnest money deposit shall be refunded to the buyer. I think a good question. You guys may want to get in the habit of asking yourselves, especially in the real world. You're going to come across situations and you're going to, oh, what do I do? What do I do? Always stop and ask yourself, what does the contract say? Because there's a really good chance that the answer you're looking for is right here. What does the contract say? The last thing here, closing shall constitute acceptance of the property in its then existing condition unless provisions are otherwise made in writing. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. This house and all its problems are now yours. Here's the key. They chose to move forward from the due diligence period. They chose to move forward to buy. And closing is going to constitute their acceptance of the property. I think a common question I get, and it's a good question, what do you do if you go in, let's say the final walkthrough, you're on your way to settlement, you meet your buyers at the house that morning, on your way to the closing attorney's office, and there's a bunch of garbage or debris or a bunch of personal property that hasn't been removed, that isn't negotiated. The buyer's got two choices. They either go and accept it in its then existing condition, or they don't. Don't sign and then expect the seller to come back and get their stuff. Does that make sense? If your buyer doesn't want the seller's junk, then we need to get on the phone with the listing agent. We're all on our way to the attorney's office anyway. So if we need something drafted up, we're sitting in front of an attorney, we can make this happen. But do not tell your buyers to sign and then you can just work it out later. What does the contract say? Acceptance of the property in its then existing condition. So if they're not satisfied with it, we need to work this out before they sign. Questions on that? Buyer's going to make some representations to the seller. The information that the buyer represents to the seller should be able to rely on when deciding if they want to enter into a contract with this buyer. So this needs to be completed accurately. One of the biggest questions the seller has is, what kind of funds are they going to get to complete this purchase? Is it a cash buyer? Are they going to pay for it in cash? Or are they getting a loan or a bank fund? So we have to tell the seller not just that you're going to buy it, but how are you going to buy it? Is it going to be a mix of the two? Are you going to go 50-50 cash and a loan? But the buyer needs to disclose, or I should say represent, to the seller. You can see here some terms of the loans. If there's a second mortgage loan, again, just as much information as we can share. Reminding us again that this contract is not contingent or conditioned upon obtaining a loan. The buyer has to represent that they do or do not have to sell or lease another property. Previously, we just said, hey, you should consider selling or leasing this out while we're still in due diligence. Now the seller, we need to represent to the seller if there is another property. Somebody asked earlier how you sort through those 45 offers. If one of those offers, the buyer has a sell or property to sell, that doesn't look as good as the other 44 that don't, right? So this could be something that could hurt the buyer if they do. But we just need to represent that. And again, it's not conditioned upon the sale or lease. Performance of buyer's financial obligations. There are no other circumstances that would prohibit the buyer from being able to buy. So in other words, they're not like facing bankruptcy, for example. Then the buyer has to represent if they have or have not received the Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement, also known as the RPODs that we talked about in Unit 8. So buyer has received a signed copy of the RPODs per this North Carolina General Statute. You can Google that and look at it if you want to. Or a buyer has not received a signed copy prior to making this offer and shall have the right to terminate or withdraw this contract without penalty, and that would include them getting their due diligence feedback. So there are a few exceptions we said when they might be able to get their due diligence. One of those, another one of those might be if the seller hasn't provided the RPODs within the stipulated time period there. If the RPODs is exempt, then we need to spell that out here. So the biggest reason we see the RPODs being exempt is new construction, but you also might have it exempt for like a foreclosure or something. Yeah, do I have a question? Then we go through that same little exercise with the mineral and oil and gas rights mandatory disclosure statement, also known as the MOG. Buyer has received it, buyer has not received it. In which case, within the stipulated amount of time, they can withdraw this contract without penalty. And once again, that does include a refund of the due diligence fee. Or it could be that the MOG is exempt. The guidelines, by the way, that's what this is saying. It tells you the different reasons, but you guys don't need to get bogged down with that. And then we have the buyer's obligations. What are they required to do? Here's our special assessments again. The buyer is going to take the property subject to all special assessments that are approved following settlement. So there might be some special assessments that are proposed. They just haven't been voted on yet. If the seller's aware of anything out there that's being considered, hopefully they'll let the buyer know. But if it's not approved until after settlement, then those are going to be the buyer's responsibility. Buyer's responsible for certain costs. So we talked about the cost of the loan, owners association, appraisal, title search, etc. And then authorization to disclose. As I mentioned earlier, buyer's agents, like as soon as you go under contract, call your buyer and tell them the good news. And of course, send them a copy of the contract. But the very next thing you need to do is get a copy of this to the lender. We need to get a copy of the contract to the closing attorney so they can start doing their title search, so we can get settlement scheduled. This gives me permission to send the lender and the closing attorney a copy of their contract so we can get things moving. So I have authorization to disclose whatever information they need. Again, 4, 5, and 6 are all about the buyers. So when you're working with a buyer, remember, we're going over the provisions with them. And that's how you know what you want to focus on. Questions on buyers? If 4, 5, and 6 are all about the buyers, 7 and 8 are all about the sellers. Listing agents, this is what we want to talk about with our sellers. And again, the seller needs to make some representations to the buyer. The buyer should be able to rely on this for accuracy when determining if they want to enter into a contract with this buyer or not. How long has the seller owned the property? Have they owned it for at least a year? Have they owned it for less than a year? Who typically owns a property for less than 1 year? Typically.
A flipper?
Investor.
The investor. Yeah. Some lenders care about that. Some lenders don't. Some loan types, loan products care about that. So the seller's just representing their length of ownership. Does not yet own the property. Could be they're in the purchase of buying it. I know wholesaling, you guys might have heard about this. It's making a big wave into real estate. So there's situations where they don't yet own the property. Not saying it's not going to work or not. We're just saying we've got to represent your length of ownership. Seller needs to represent lead-based paint. If it is residential and built prior to, there's our magic year of 1978. Again, the contract helps us by letting us know when we need to attach an addendum. So there's our lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard disclosure addendum. Sellers representing if it is in an owner's association, if they are in an HOA. And then the seller's asked to provide the following about the owner's association. So there's our covenants and bylaws and articles of incorporation, etc. Maybe they have all of this, maybe they just have one of it. It's up to the owner's association. Again, this very list shows up in the listing agreement. So listing agents, we can have these conversations with our sellers at the time that we list it. Like, look, when we go under contract, a buyer's going to ask to see these documents. Let's go ahead and get these gathered up now, so we can provide them to the buyers for them to review. We're also going to list the name of the association and what the dues are right now. Are they X amount per month, per year, however that HOA is spelled out. So we're just representing information about the owners association. Some places have 2 owners association. It might be you have the required owners association, and then there's an optional association for the pool, for example. So we're just providing the buyer with the information. Sellers representing if there's a fuel tank on the property, again, also in the listing agreement. So we, as the listing agent, know this information coming into it. We've already discussed it. There is or is not a fuel tank on the property. You can see here we got a place for 2 tanks. Is it in use? Is it owned or leased? Where is it located? What kind of fuel is in it? And who do we contact? The fuel vendor. Tanks are included in the sale. They're considered fixtures. Fuel, seller can use the fuel up until settlement. Any remaining fuel left in the tank is going to become part of the sale, part of the purchase price. So the seller is welcome to use the fuel until they move out, until settlement. Whatever's left will be left for the buyer. State law just reminds us that only those authorized can fill or mess with the tank. You and I can't get out there. And then the other thing that the seller needs to represent to the buyer is if the property is currently if it's currently leased out. So if there's an existing lease, buyer's going to buy honoring the existing lease. They will acquire the tenant. So that information, you can see here, we got additional provisions addendum, which we're going to talk a little bit more about once we get through this. So we can spell out like the seller needs to provide the buyer with a copy of the lease agreement, the financials, is the tenant current or not? Are they delinquent? That kind of thing. So seller representations to the buyer. And then 8 is the seller obligations. Remember, their biggest obligation is to provide free marketable title, free of all liens. So that's the seller's biggest obligation: evidence of title, payoff statement, authorization to disclose, again, access to property. Seller needs to provide reasonable access to the property through the earlier of closing, allowing the buyer to do their due diligence, to verify satisfactory completion of negotiated repairs, to conduct the final walkthrough. Seller's obligation includes providing existing utilities at the seller's cost. It's kind of hard for the home inspector to inspect the property if the water and the power has been cut off. So the seller's going to keep that on if they've already moved out, if it's vacant. The thing here to understand is they cannot deny the buyer access to the property to do their due diligence. They can't accept a contract and a due diligence fee and then not let the home inspector on the property. Now, this is reasonable times, of course, reasonable access. And up until that final walkthrough, which needs to be as close to settlement as possible. I do mine like on our way to the attorney's office, because I need my buyers to know what it is they're signing in its then existing condition. Removal of seller's property, anything, all personal property that was not part of the purchase, all garbage and debris from the property. Sometimes sellers think they're leaving buyers gifts. Probably one of the bigger ones that comes up is the grill. The seller starts moving and realizes the grill is kind of a pain in the butt to move, so they're just going to leave it for the buyer. Guess what? If the buyer wanted that grill, they would have asked for it when they made the offer. But more often than not, the buyer comes with their own grill. So the seller can't leave gifts. If it wasn't negotiated, it's got to go. If they do, the buyer's got 2 choices. They either go and sign and accept, or you get on the phone and we make other arrangements. Affidavit indemnification. This is one thing that the seller is going to have to sign at settlement. I got you. This is one thing that the seller is going to have to sign at settlement saying, remember that mechanics lien, 120 days. So let's say during due diligence, the buyer asks the seller to do repairs and the seller says, yeah, I'm happy to do it. And they do the electrical repairs, but they never pay the electrician. 120 days later, that mechanic files a lien, but the property's already conveyed. So now remember, it's a specific lien, and specific liens attached to what? You see mouse move?
Property.
The specific liens attached to the property. So we could be dealing with the seller. Yeah, I'll do repairs, not paying the bill, lien gets filed, but now it's on the new owner because that time has passed. So one of the things the seller is going to sign is saying this can't happen. An affidavit saying that this won't happen. And if they lie, because sometimes people lie, and if they lie and it does happen, remember that's why the buyer has title insurance. The new owner has title insurance. title insurance in this case will go after the seller first because they signed an affidavit saying that wasn't going to happen. Buyer's agents, one thing we can do when you ask for those repairs is also ask for a paid in full receipt. So that way we can see that the electrician has been paid and we know who the electrician is. So if there's issues after closing, we know who to call. Good title, legal access. You guys have already read this paragraph. This is what we looked at in Unit 5. Seller shall execute and deliver. There's our general warranty deed in recordable form no later than settlement, conveying fee simple, marketable, insurable title, without exceptions to mechanic liens, lis pendens, judgments, encumbrances, etc. Property must have legal access to a public right-of-way. Again, this is the seller's biggest obligation, is to provide that clear marketable title. Governmental compliance. This is new to our contract as of this last revision, July of 2023. So I don't know if it's going to make it to the test yet or not, because it is just since this past July. But if there is any governmental compliance, something to do with maybe permitting, zoning, environmental protections, kind of gives us some examples here. Unless seller has specifically disclosed any such violation prior to the effective date, if the violation is discovered after the effective date but prior to closing, the seller has the option to cure the violation. If the seller does not cure that violation, then the buyer may choose to accept the violation or terminate this contract and get their earnest money deposit and due diligence fee back. So this is another reason, another time where this buyer could get both earnest money and due diligence. In this case, it's almost best for the seller to fess up about any zoning issues or permitting issues, that kind of thing. All they have to do is disclose it. Failure to disclose it means that it could give the buyer an out if they choose to terminate. They also have the option to accept the property with that violation if it's discovered. But what it's saying in this case, it's better for the seller to disclose because that doesn't give a buyer an out. But if they don't disclose and the buyer finds it, here we are. I think this was the paragraph that moved us from 16 pages to 17 in this last revision. Deeds, taxes, and fees. Seller's going to pay for the deed preparation. The attorney's got to prepare the deed, so the seller pays for that. Seller also pays for state and county excise tax. We talked about excise taxes being the seller's responsibility. And then we need to address to the attorney how the deed is going to be made. Is it made to the buyer, corporation, LLC, trust, etc.? If the seller agrees to pay any of the buyer's closing costs, we're going to negotiate that amount and put it here. If there is no agreed upon seller pay closing costs, please make sure you put 0 there. That's not a, remember, not a blank. We want to leave blank. The rest of this is just going on to say that sometimes lenders, sometimes loan products put a cap on how much the seller can pay. So buyer's agents, before we start asking for seller pay closing costs, just make sure you get with your lender and see what that cap is. The other thing, if the buyer's getting a VA loan, veterans loan, which we'll talk about in the next unit, there are some inspections that the VA will require. Like the VA is going to require a pest inspection, for example, but they're not going to let the buyer pay for that. They require it, but they don't let the buyer pay for it. So if the buyer is not permitted to pay, who's up? Who's gonna pay for that pest inspection?
The seller?
The seller. You guys are so cute. I see you screaming at the camera. I love it. Yeah, so if the buyer can't pay for it because the lender won't let them, then the seller's up. Listing agents, do you think that's important when you're presenting an offer to your sellers? You may be on the hook to pay for the pest inspection, well inspection, septic inspection. We have an FHA VA addendum that addresses that more specifically. We'll talk about that one. We're going to talk about some of our addendum, not all of them, of course, but some of the more commonly used addendum. Here's our owners association. Again, seller's going to pay any charges of the owners association in full. Anything that's been approved prior to settlement, the seller's responsible for paying, whether or not it's due in one lump sum or future installments. Some owners association may do like a special assessment for new roofs for the condominium complex, but they may not require one lump sum. They may break it down into payments, you know, so many payments throughout the year or something. Either way, no matter what, if it's been approved prior to settlement, then the seller is going to be responsible for paying that. So again, special assessments. We defined it on page 3. We defined what a special assessment is on page 3. Then we said the buyer's obligated to pay special assessments that are confirmed after settlement. The seller's obligated to pay special assessments that are confirmed prior to settlement. It depends on whether or not it's been approved or not. Late listing penalties. If the seller didn't pay 2023 taxes, that's all going to be on the seller. Negotiated repairs are all handled in a good and workmanlike manner, and the buyer shall have the right to verify that they are completed in a good and workmanlike manner prior to settlement. For example, some home inspectors will go back out and re-inspect just that one thing that was repaired and let the buyer know that it was done in a good and workmanlike manner. So the buyer has that right. Here's our home warranty. No home warranty to be provided. Buyer can get a 1-year home warranty. Seller agrees to pay for it, or the seller has obtained and will provide a 1-year home warranty. And then the seller's breach of contract. We got breach is spelled out in paragraph 23. So we'll see this in just a minute. So 7 and 8 are all about the seller's responsibilities and the seller's obligations. Questions about the sellers? What about foreclosed homes? Are they sold as is? Generally. And there may be, we probably use the same contract, but usually banks may have come with their own contract. So the verbiage is going to be different. But yeah, once a bank takes over a property in foreclosure, they're not fixing anything because they don't have to. That's not what they're in the business to do, right? The bank's in the business to lend money, not to handle real estate and repairs, and that's just not what they're in the job to do. Again, more on foreclosure, short sales. We're getting in our financing units. We'll get there Thursday. Let's get those started on Thursday. Again, this was fairly new. Paragraph 9 was just added in July. So we've talked about these owners associations, but now this just gives us specifics. This just breaks it down, what the seller shall pay, what the buyer shall pay. There's going to be some kind of fee to transfer from the current owner to the new owner. The HOA's got to make some administrative moves. So there's going to be a fee involved in that. This just kind of breaks down who's responsible for what. Prorations and adjustments. Proration is just taking a shared expense and making it fair, making it equal between the two parties. Prorating is some of the math we get to do in Unit 21. Remember back in Unit 3, we talked about this year's property taxes. So this year's property taxes are something that's going to be prorated. If you buy my house today, it's not fair for either one of us to be responsible for the entire year's tax bill. So we're going to make it fair by prorating. So taxes on real property, taxes on personal property, we may prorate rent. If there's a tenant involved, we may also prorate HOA, Owners Association dues. Question comes in, does the seller have to pay for a home warranty? Absolutely not. I'm going to go back up. We can see that's a completely negotiable field. So they can select no home warranty is to be provided by the seller. Totally negotiable. And I'm telling you, if you got 45 offers in your hand and one of them is asking for a home warranty, that one may not look as good as the other 44, right? It's been competitive out there. Has anybody bought a house in the last 3 years? Godspeed, right? It's tough out there as a buyer in the last few years. It's starting to get a little bit better, but yeah, you weren't getting anything in the last couple of years. Condition of property, risk of loss. If the property is not substantially the same or better condition at closing, as of the date of this offer, reasonable wear and tear expected, buyer may terminate this contract, written notice delivered to the seller, get their due diligence and their earnest money back. Let's say we're under contract and the house burns down. The buyer's got a decision to make. They can terminate this contract and get their due diligence and earnest money back. Or they can go on and purchase the property. And in addition to the property, get the proceeds of the seller's insurance claim. So if the house burns down or major, any kind of damage to the property, it's not the same or better condition, reasonable wear and tear expected, the buyer's got a choice to make. Walk away and get your deposit and your fee back, or go ahead and proceed and deal with the seller's insurance company. If I were the buyer's agent and this happened, my buyer's going to call me and say, what should I do? My answer is, let's get your attorney on the phone, because I need the attorney to spell this out for them. But know that they have choices. Also, risk of loss is going to be on the seller until closing. Remember, it's still the seller's property until that brand new deed is recorded, the very last act. Seller needs to keep homeowner's insurance on the property until closing. Even if it's vacant, they still need to keep it insured. I can't tell you how many sellers I've had said, woo, we're gone to contract. I'm going to call Allstate and cancel my insurance. Whoa, slow down. It's still their property. So make sure we have this conversation with them. Delay in settlement, as mentioned, delays just happen, you guys. I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot tell you what might delay this closing. But what I do know is delays just happen. I always tell my parties to have a plan B. Because if we're all going to work really hard to close on this date that we agree to, but if anything happens, new construction, you can almost bank on some delays. What if we don't have loan approval in time? What if the seller's got to clear something off the title? What if we have a major storm come through and it knocks out power for 3 or 4 days, right? The possibilities are endless. We could spend all night talking about the what ifs. What I'm telling you is that delays in settlement just happen. So always have your parties have a plan B. I do not want anybody sleeping in the U-Haul truck tonight. And specifically, our contract builds in a 7-day delay. So what this means, there's the delaying party and the non-delaying party. Let's use the example that we're delayed because the buyer hasn't gotten final loan approval yet. The buyer would be the delaying party. The seller would be the non-delaying party. If we were supposed to close today, but we don't have that final loan approval yet, there's a 7-day delay built into the contract, which means the seller can't do anything but sit still and be patient and hope that we get loan approval within the next 7 days. On day 8, the seller could terminate. They've given that 7-day delay. We could also negotiate a new settlement date. If we don't, though, we have a 7-day delay built in because things just happen. I was telling somebody the other day, there was there's all these like Facebook groups and stuff, you know, real estate agents, and some of the stories I see flying around there are really interesting. And there was one I saw not too long ago. Listing agent, buyer's agent, and buyers showed up to settlement. They were sitting there. They were all waiting on the seller. Seller never showed. The listing agent couldn't get in touch with the seller, couldn't get him to answer the phone. Where's the seller? Where's the seller? After they sat there for a few hours, they said, well, might as well go home. So everybody left with nothing done. Y'all know where the seller was. They were arrested that morning. They couldn't come to settlement. Evidently, they didn't use their one phone call on their agent, you know. Who could have predicted that? Maybe the seller, but seriously, who could have predicted that? So delays just happen. Have everybody have a plan B. Possession. We've talked about this. Possession, including all means of access to the property, such as keys, security codes, garage door openers, shall be delivered upon closing. Buyers should not be getting access to the property until that deed is recorded. There are so many stories of buyers getting the keys at settlement. But my question to you is, what does the contract say? It's not uncommon for the attorney to give the buyer's agent the key. Buyer's agents, you need to keep that key securely in your pocket until you get that "we are on record" email. Don't give the key to your buyer and say, promise me you won't go to the property until I tell you to. No, we need to make sure, because remember, it's still the seller's until that deed is recorded. What if the buyer shows up before the deed's recorded and they walk in the front door and fall down and hurt themselves? The seller's insurance company is going to be on the hook for that, right? So we need to make sure that they're not getting that access. I said, did I make that story up? No, I read that on a Facebook group. Now, did they make it up? I don't know, but I don't know. One thing I've learned in this industry is anything is possible. So we should not. My husband and I bought this house in 2020, and I got to wear 2 hats. I was the buyer and the buyer's agent. We left the closing attorney's office and they handed me the key. My buyer said, can we go to, or my husband said, can we go to our house? And I was like, nah. Buyer's agent hat was on. I was like, no. I said, we cannot go to the house until I get that email. So we went and got lunch and went to Home Depot, because that's what you do when you buy a house, is you go to Home Depot a lot. So we went ahead and went. We were in Home Depot when I got the email, and I said, okay, now we can go. You got to be a stickler for that. Buyers are going to try. Oh, come on, it'll be okay. Nothing will happen. What does the contract say? Do y'all have that written down yet? What does the contract say? There's your real world advice for the day. Questions on that? So as mentioned, scattered through the contract, when the need to use an addendum pops, or an addenda pops up. Now here we are, and we have this nice little compact list of commonly used addendum. So we can kind of use this as a checklist. Every single transaction is different. So every single transaction may require different addenda or different addendum. So just make sure we have everything that applies to this transaction. Because remember, the addendum adds to and becomes part of the offer to purchase and contract. So we need to make sure we're including it when we submit the offer. Couple of these things down here. You guys see how the highlights lightened? So this is a darker yellow than down here. We're not going to focus as much on these. The commission just wants us to look them over, but we're not going to spend all of our study time on the lighter yellow stuff. Is everybody good with that? So just to go through this real quick, we mentioned an assignment. With an assignment, you're giving up your rights and responsibilities. All the terms stay the same. The only thing that changes is the names of one of the parties. So in this contract, it may not be assigned without written consent of all parties. Tax deferred exchange is a IRS. If you have an investor client, they may be able to defer paying taxes on their investment properties. So whether or not we're doing a tax deferred exchange is going to be addressed here. Question, can you sell and buy a house to yourself as a real estate agent? Yeah, I'm not paying one of y'all a commission to help me buy or sell a house, right? You with me? Yeah. Agents buy houses all every day. I mean, no offense to you guys, but I got paid a commission when I bought my house. What did she just say? Yeah, I got paid a commission when we bought our house. Two hats, buyer and buyer's agent. That's a fun story. I like telling that one. Commission. Well, now your firm's policy. How are you going to get paid if you're the buyer's agent? Who's that up to? Your firm's policy. Yep, they'll address that. Parties shall be binding upon and inure to the benefit of the buyer and the seller. Here it is. And their respective heirs. When do heirs kick in? When people pass away. So remember, death is only an out when we're negotiating the offer. Once we go under contract, death is not an out. I'll let you guys look this over. Tell us how days are counted in contract days. A day is a day is a day. So if we say 15 days, Christmas counts, Sunday counts, every day counts, contract verbiage, a day is a day is a day. We'll talk about remedies when we come back from break. Questions so far, though? This is a lot of stuff in here. I wasn't kidding. And we're going through it pretty quickly. I know it's a lot whirlwind, but hopefully you guys can go back through on your own time. And remember what we said in post-licensing, we're going through this sucker word for word. So you have that to look forward to. Or if you get your first buyer or seller before post-licensing, you have to go through this word for word. All right, let's take our last break. When we come back, we're going to finish this up. So let's take 10. And we're back.
Abby got kicked out. I'm not sure. Is she rejoined? I'm not sure if she's in the waiting room or not.
Who's that?
Abby or Abigail?
Okay. I don't see her. I'll keep an eye out for her. Thank you.
No problem.
And if she needs to get back on her phone, I guess you're communicating with her. She needs to get back on with her phone. I'll allow phones in extreme. Like we're not getting the habit of being on our phone, but if you lose connection and it's your way in, I'm okay with that. Did everybody just hear what I just said? Okay. All right. We can use our phones. No, that's not what I said. It'd be hard to do this on your phone, wouldn't it? And try to see this screen. And yeah, my little eyes can't handle that. So, all right, let me take attendance before I start talking and forget. Okay. We're close, guys. I got a lot to say in 17 pages, don't we? All right. Remedies for breach. Now, let me say this. Remedies for breach have always been part of the contract. What they did a couple years ago was they pulled it out and gave it its own section so it's easier to find. I'll be real honest, between me and you, the only thing I wish they would have done is not put it at the very end, because I fear that it kind of gets lost in the end. I wish they would have put it somewhere closer to the beginning, but they didn't. So the remedies, and it spells out specifically what happens if the buyer breaches, what happens if the seller breaches. And this is near the end, provision 23. So let's talk about breach by the buyer. In the event of breach of this contract by the buyer has breached, which means we're after due diligence, and for some reason they were unable to purchase this home. Sellers shall be entitled to the earnest money deposit, the payment of the earnest money deposit, and any due diligence fee together serve as the seller's liquidated damages. These are money damages that we agree to at the time of contract formation. So that due diligence fee was negotiated and agreed to. The earnest money deposit was negotiated and agreed to. Together, they serve as the seller's liquidated damages and as the seller's sole and exclusive remedy for the buyer breaching. The seller, here she is, the seller can't sue the buyer for breaching. All they get is their earnest money and their due diligence fee. So again, listing agents, I say, make sure that your seller is good with this amount. What if the buyer decides 3 hours prior to settlement that they're not going to buy this house? This is all the seller gets, those liquidated damages. The rest of this is just going on to say, I know a question comes up. What if the seller agreed to do repairs and completed the repairs, and then the buyer decided not to buy, 3 hours prior to settlement? They can't go after that because presumably now the seller has a better product to put on the market, right? Now they can say electrical work, $1,500 in electrical work just completed, right? So presumably with doing those repairs, it might give them a leg up. Yep, of course. Breach by the seller. In the event of breach of this contract by the seller, buyer's got some options. They may terminate this contract. They shall be entitled to their earnest money and due diligence, together with reasonable costs actually incurred by the buyer's due diligence, known as the due diligence costs. So if the seller breaches, the buyer's got choices. Choice number one is to go after the seller for earnest money, due diligence, and whatever money they've paid as part of their due diligence. Did they have the home inspection done, the appraisal, the survey, the pest inspection, radon test? All those inspections and investigations, the seller breaches, if they're not willing to sit down and write out a check to the buyer for this money, the buyer can take them to court. They can take them to court for their consequential damages. Those are those money damages that you can prove with receipts and invoices. And what the buyer's trying to do is get the money to make them whole again. Like if I never went under contract with you, I'd have never had this home inspection and I'd have never been out that money. Give me that money back. That's what they're after. So option 1 is to terminate and get some money. Option 2 is not to terminate and instead treat this contract in remaining in full force and seek the remedy of specific performance. Remember, we said specific performance, if awarded, the judge could make the seller sell. The judge could make the seller perform. If I were a buyer's agent, of course, we'd be talking to attorneys. But I think my question would be, why did the seller breach? If they are, for whatever reason, unable to provide clear marketable title, then going after them for specific performance may not be an option. They can't provide that clear marketable title. Does that make sense? So the buyer may just have to get their money back. But if they just change their mind, if they just decide not to sell, then I would think specific performance, it's up to the buyer. Do they want their money back, monies back, or do they want the property? And again, when they start asking us a bunch of questions like, what should I do? Then we need to make sure that they're discussing their options with their closing attorney. Is the seller required to disclose why they breached? No. So that may be part of it too, right? But again, attorneys are having these conversations, you guys, because this could be offering legal advice. And remember, we can't do that. So it spells out breach by either party, that they don't fulfill their obligations, do what they're promised to do. And then this piece about the attorney's fee says that if we have to go to court, basically what this is saying is that the losing party is not only going to pay their court costs, but they also get to pay the court costs of the winning party too. So if our earnest money's in dispute, for example, if we can't agree to release it, somebody's going to have to pay those attorney's fees. Anything could be a reason. Yep, anything's possible. I'm not leaving anything off the table. What if they get a higher offer in? We need to get the seller. So you're under contract and a better offer comes in. We need to have the seller talk to their attorney before they terminate and accept this offer, because it might be the cost to terminate this one outweighs the better offer. So again, we need to have them weigh their options out with their attorney, and they will. Another offer will come in and it'll be better, and the seller will be like, let's just terminate this one and accept this one, and it's just not that easy. So we may need to get attorneys involved at this point just to make sure everybody knows what's up going forward. So this offer becomes a binding contract on the effective date, which we've defined. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. You can see I got a place for 2 buyers, 2 sellers to sign. As we've said before, we have an additional signatures addendum. So if you have more than 2 buyers and 2 sellers, I need everybody to sign this contract. Let me know that everybody's on board. We also have a place for an entity buyer, entity seller, if it's a corporation or an LLC. Technically speaking, this is where the contract ends. Where the party signs is part of the contract. The last 2 pages are like supplemental pages, just to help things along a little bit. So there's our wire fraud warning. We saw this in both of our agency agreements. Now we're reminding them one time not to email or accept an email with wire transfer instructions. Notice information. How do the parties want to be contacted? Buyers' contact information, sellers' contact information. Generally speaking, if agents are involved, the agents are communicating back and forth amongst each other, not necessarily between buyer and seller. So if we don't want our buyers and sellers to communicate or share their information, we're told to insert NA for any forms of communication which are not approved, not allowed. And then we have a place, confirmation of agency and our contact information. So this is the only place that we belong. And the only reason we're here is to share our contact information. So we have the selling firm and the listing firm. Remember, buyers on the left, sellers on the right. So the selling firm, what is their role? Is the firm acting as a buyer's agent, a seller sub-agent, or a dual agent? We need to identify the firm's role in this transaction. We're going to put in the firm's license number, mailing address, and then we're going to list the individual agent. And if the individual agent is acting as a designated dual agent. And then we have the agent's license number, phone, fax, and email. We go through that same little exercise on the right with the sellers, the listing firm. We have to identify our role in writing at the time we present the offer. So again, the forms committee handles that for us. What is the listing firm acting as? Are you acting as a seller's agent or a dual agent? What's the firm's license number? And then again, the individual listing agent, if they're acting as a designated dual agent, license number, phone number, and email. So our confirmation of agency and how do you want to communicate with each other. And then the last page, there's money change in hands. So good rule of thumb, when money changes hands, somebody needs to sign off acknowledging receipt. So first off, let's talk about the due diligence. Well, let me back up for a second. You're negotiating the offer. We come to terms. Everybody signs and communication of acceptance crosses the line. Yay, we're under contract. Mini celebration. I'm all about celebrating the small wins until we get to the we are on record email. So mini celebration, we're under contract. Buyer's agent, you need to get with your buyer right away to get 2 checks from your buyer. You need a due diligence check and you need an earnest money check. Buyer's agent will deliver the due diligence and the earnest money check to the appropriate party. So the first thing that happens with the due diligence, the buyer's agent will deliver it to the listing agent, in which case they need to sign acknowledging that they've received it. Can we all agree that on its way and in your hand are 2 totally different things? Can we agree with that? Can a lot happen when it's on its way? I don't want y'all signing that you've received it until it's in your hand. There have been cases where the due diligence goes missing. The agent signed it because the buyer's agent was going to drop it off after lunch. So let me just go ahead and sign it so you can pick it up. No, do not sign that you've received it until you have it, until you can touch it. The listing agent then needs to deliver that due diligence fee to the seller. Once the seller receives it, they need to acknowledge receipt. Buyer's agents, you are also delivering the earnest money to the escrow agent. The escrow agent needs to sign acknowledging receipt. There's initial earnest money, and then if there's any additional, and you will notice the additional earnest money has a place not just for the date that it was received, but also the time, because additional earnest money is a time is of the essence. So we need to make sure that that additional earnest money was delivered on time. So let's see, I've got a couple questions. At one time you mentioned that you work as a team in your office. I do. Is everyone that touched the deal listed? No, we just have one that acts as the listing agent or the buyer's agent. Does everyone in the firm get paid at closing? Man, I wish. But usually we just kind of have, we got pay scale set up. And guys, remember, Every single firm, every single team is different, so they can all be structured differently. This, ladies and gentlemen, is your 17-page offer to purchase and contract. It takes a 17, the whole gist of this, the buyer agrees to buy the seller's property. It takes us 17 pages to say that. But guys, as you can see, there's a lot of information in here. And the best thing we can do for our clients is to be familiar with what's in this. They're not reading this. So we need to be familiar so we can have these conversations, so we can discuss these things with them. I also want to say, this is standard form 2T, which is the most common, the most popular used. The forms committee also provides us with an offer to purchase and contract for new construction. So if you're purchasing new construction, I can't have verbiage in there that says this property is being sold in its current condition, like when we're standing amongst studs, right? So we need to have a contract that makes the builder finish building the property. So we have one for new construction. We also have an offer to purchase and contract for vacant land. Because if you're negotiating to buy land, there is no property on the there is no structure, I should say. It's just dirt. So all this verbiage about the property isn't going to be on there. The terms are similar, and we're not going to look at those. The one I want you guys to focus on for now, until you get to post licensing, until you get out in the real world, is the offer to purchase and contract 2T. Again, you have those provisions. Page starts on 292 and it goes over to 304. Old book people, there's some new stuff in there about the earnest money deposit. So I'll load that into the online learning system. So you'll have that information, because I definitely want to make sure you have everything. What questions do I have?
I have one about specific performance, Julie.
Yeah, yeah.
The buyer can't go after the seller for specific performance. Well, they only can go after the seller for specific performance if nothing is prohibiting them from conveying the property, correct?
I mean, yeah, they could go after the seller, but if the seller cannot convey it, they're not going to get far.
So, right. So, I mean, not all the time will you win that case, basically.
That's right. That's right. If they can convey, I think specific performance might be if the seller changes their mind. I had sellers once, and they were hard bent on selling, like ASAP. They were ready to sell, and we'll take anything. We just got to sell. We get under contract. They call me a couple days later and say, guess what? I said, what? And I said, we're pregnant. We don't want to sell our house anymore. First off, congratulations. Second off, you are in a legally binding agreement to sell your house. And if you choose not to, I mean, they're capable of selling. They just changed their mind. It was nothing more than bad timing. And I said, if you decide not to sell, you're going to be in breach. And I need you to talk to your attorney about the what ifs, because I needed them to have all that information. They hung up, they talked amongst themselves. They decided, whatever, we'll just sell. But you know, in that case, this buyer had a case, right? They were capable of selling. They just changed their minds. So that would just be a question I had. You know, remember we need, you know, let's say this is an estate and grandma left the property to the 15 grandkids, and all 15 grandkids are married. So now I need 30 people on board to sell this house. And if I can only get 29, then the seller can't convey. And it's not that they can't, it's just that they won't show up and sell. You know what I'm saying? So I think the answer to that kind of is it depends on the situation. Which is why we have attorneys, you guys. Always remember to stay in your lane. We can't be giving out legal advice. I mean, I can sit down and read the contract to them, but then when they start, well, what about this? And what if that? Attorneys.
Julie, how long have due diligence fees been around? Over,
So I bought my condo in 2006, and we didn't have due diligence fees then.
are you
So,
answering? We bought over 30 years ago. So okay.
Yeah, when I bought, so there was something called Alternative 1 and Alternative 2. And for the life of me, I can't remember what Alternative 1 meant, but that's what everybody did. And Alt 2 was pretty much what we know today is the due diligence period, but nobody used it because nobody understood it. So then at some point, like I said, after 06, maybe it was 08, 09, somewhere in there, at some point they took out the Alt 1 and now we just have the due diligence. And Roderick, due diligence, it's again one of those things that's not uncommon or not common in many other states. So when you have buyers coming from other states and you're talking to them about due diligence, you may need to, slow down and make sure they understand, because we're one of few that does this. By the way, when I bought my little condo in 2006, the offer to purchase and contract was 8 pages. See how much we've grown in, was that 06, 16? What? I can't do math, it's too late. But that amount of time, right? See how much we've grown since 06? 8 pages then. And we continue to grow. I don't have a lot of other rooms, so we're probably not too far, many revisions away from 18 pages. And on it goes. Every lawsuit, every court trial puts a new provision in our offer to purchase and contract.
Quick question. Yeah, the due diligence, isn't that like finding out about the house or doing research and stuff about the house when it was built and everything like that? Am I wrong?
Yep. So the due diligence, the buyer's opportunity to investigate the property. Benjamin, you came on late, so you want to make sure you go back and review that when the
Okay.
recording becomes available, because we've talked about due diligence and due diligence fee and due diligence period, all that.
Okay. Well, I was asking because when I bought my house, I don't think I would charge that fee. That's what I was trying to figure out when did it kind of start? Yeah.
It's a negotiated amount. So buyers and sellers, and if the buyer offers 0 and the seller accepts 0, you didn't have to pay any fees. All right. The other big part of our offer to purchase and contract, many of our offer to purchase and contracts have some kind of addendum. Addendum are like common things, but just not common enough to make it to the offer to purchase and contract yet. So we have some commonly used standard addenda, and of course, the North Carolina Association of Realtors and the North Carolina Bar Association provides us with these other pre-printed forms that we need to look at, fill in the blanks. We're not going to look specifically at the forms. There's the good news. We don't look at the forms. However, we need to have a conversation, a brief conversation about what each addenda does. If you get a test question on these addenda, they're going to give you a scenario and they're going to want to know which addenda should you add, which one should you include with the offer to purchase and contract. Oh yeah, 5-digit DDF, 6-digit I heard of in some cases. So yeah, buyers have had it rough the last few years. Remember that pendulum? The seller's market, if this is the seller's market, a couple years ago, that sucker was like way up here. And now it's come down. It's more of a normal seller market. We're still in a strong seller's market, but at least we're not, way up there anymore. It was crazy. I've never seen anything like it in my 23 years, and probably never will again. If there's a conflict between the addenda and the contract, then the addenda will control. So the addenda, the appropriate addenda, can override a contract. So the commonly used ones we're going to talk about, page 305 of your book. And again, we're not going to look at all of these. We're not going to look at any of these, but we're going to talk about a couple of them just so we have a basic understanding of what they do. So the first one I want to talk about is our FHA VA financing addendum. These are two different loan products. There's an FHA loan, there's a VA loan. We will talk about both of these when we get to Unit 15. But the big thing about this addendum, what it does, both cases, it protects the buyer's earnest money. If we find out that it doesn't appraise, so let me back up, I'm sorry. If we find out that the property doesn't appraise for the sales price, and the buyer chooses to terminate, this form protects their earnest money, even if we terminate after due diligence. The other thing that this form does, remember we said the VA, the seller may be on the hook to pay for certain inspections. Like the VA is going to require the buyer to get a pest inspection, but they're not going to let the buyer pay for it. So there's only two parties to the contract. So if the buyer can't pay for it, then the seller's up. Like we said, listing agents, isn't that important that your seller know that they would be obligated to pay that pest inspection, for example? So the VA piece of it just lets us know, let the seller know that there are certain costs. So FHA VA financing addendum, we'll actually talk a little bit more about this when we get into our financing units. Couple other addenda we have. We may have situations where possession happens at different times, not at closing, but at different times. So we may negotiate and agree to do a buyer possession before closing, or we may negotiate to do a seller possession after closing. Closing has happened, the deed has changed hands. In the first one, the buyer moves in before closing, and the second one, the seller remains after closing. Both of these addenda are for short-term purposes. If we need anything more than short-term, then we need a lease drafted up. But in both of these situations, you have one party acting as the landlord. The other party, whomever owns it at this moment, is the landlord. The other party is the tenant. We got to negotiate rent, how many days, are pets allowed? Insurance is the big one on this one. The homeowner needs homeowner's insurance. The tenant needs renter's insurance for their stuff. So both parties need to make sure they're adequately insured. And then these forms also spell out, basically the one that's living there is the one responsible for utilities, lawn care, things like that. Again, this is short-term use only. I'd say typically 7 to 14 days, if that. 14 might be a stretch. If you have anything more than that, then you want to have an attorney draft up a lease, or maybe use the pre-printed lease, bless you, or maybe use the pre-printed lease that the forms committee provides us. So again, buyer possession before closing means the parties agree to let the buyer move in before the deed conveys. Seller possession after closing means that the new owner agrees to allow the old owner to stay for a couple days. Think about this. Isn't this funny? Today you're the owner. Tomorrow you're the tenant of the home that you just sold, right? I did one of those. My buyers, the listing agent called me and said her sellers were buying new construction and it got delayed a couple days. And she said that her sellers had 3 kids, all under the age of 5. And she said if they only have to move those kids once, that would be great. Well, my buyers weren't moving up for a few more months anyway. They were coming from somewhere else. They weren't coming here for a few months anyway. And they said, are you telling us we can make money off of the house that we just bought? And I said, yep. They were like, where do I sign? So they got a couple of days of rent. Isn't that awesome? And let me tell y'all, those sellers left that house in immaculate condition. They left a dang gift basket on the counter for them. They were so appreciative of my buyers being willing to work with them. So, you know, that's the kind of, and it was only like 4 or 5 days, but just enough that they only had to move those kids one time. Yeah, 3 kids, all under the age of 5. Massage your head a little bit, you know. Hectic in that house, I'm sure. So possession agreements. Here's our lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum that we talked about in Unit 20. This is required on all residential properties, may they be for sale or for rent. Anything built prior to, what's that magic year? Scream at the camera at me.
78.
There it is. Anything built prior to 1978. Again, you guys, once you get past your test, you don't need to know that date because it's on our paperwork that we're using every day. We just got to get you through the tests. I'm not telling you, this form is not telling you that this home has lead in it. All this is saying is because of the year that it was built, it may have lead in it. Buyers and tenants should be encouraged to learn about the dangers of exposure of lead in the home. And in Unit 20, we talked about that EPA booklet, know about the lead in your home, something like that. So anything but prior to 78, we got an addendum for that. Additional provisions addendum. I'm going to say of all the addenda, this is probably the most commonly used one. These provisions are used often, but not in every single transaction. So the additional provisions addendum just gives us some other commonly used provisions. For example, when we started this evening, somebody asked about how long offers are good for. The offeror can put an expiration date on their offer. They can say this offer is good until Wednesday at 5 p.m. And if I don't have a response by then the offer is done, it's dead. So if you want to put an expiration on your offer, the additional provisions addendum covers that. 7(8) lead paint. There you go. I like it, Brooke. Thank you. Keep it simple, right? 7(8) lead paint. You just became a story in my pre-licensing classes going forward. I give credit where credit's due. No names, of course. If there's an on-site septic system, or if there needs to be an on-site septic system, we have a place in the additional provisions addendum to cover the septic tank installation and modification. The seller will be asked to make sure that area of the property is cleared and available to the inspector by the date of the inspection. Whose cost is that on? We mentioned if there's a tenant in place, we need to discuss transferring that tenant, that lease from the seller to the buyer. So if there's a tenant, we got our rental, income and investment property provision where we can make sure that the seller gives the buyer a copy of the lease, for example, and the tenants making sure they're up to date on their rent, that kind of thing. Agreed upon repairs and or improvements. Remember, I'm attaching this to our offer. We're not under contract yet. It might be that your buyer sees a repair that they want addressed, and they want the seller to take this into consideration when we're presenting the offer. Now, this doesn't negate the buyer doing their due diligence and all those inspections. They can always ask for repairs once we're under contract. But let's say, for example, you're showing this property and the buyer says, gee, I would buy this house if that window pane wasn't shattered. Well, I don't need a home inspector to come in here and tell me that the window pane needs to be fixed, right? You can look and see it spidered and shattered and, about to crack all over the place. So if your buyer is adamant about not buying this house in that condition, then we can ask the seller to fix that window pane, for example, at the time we're presenting the offer. So we have a place for that. If there is a manufactured or a mobile home on the property that will convey, we need to get some information about that, like the VIN number, for example. And then if there's a pool, an outdoor pool or spa that needs to be inspected, for example, this time of year. If your buyer's buying a home with a pool in February, it's probably been winterized. So in order to have it inspected, it's got to be unwinterized, inspected, and then re-winterized. So whose cost is that on? That's all negotiable, and that's part of our additional provisions addendum. Questions on this one? There's an owner's association disclosure addendum. We're going to use this when we don't use the RPODs, residential property and owners association disclosure statement. Remember, one of the biggest reasons we don't use the RPODs is because it's new construction. So we're not going to attest to the conditions of the property because nobody's lived there yet. However, the RPODs is exempt, but it's still in an HOA. So we still need to share that owner's association information. So that's what that form does. We're not using the RPODs, for example, because it's new construction, but we still need information on the HOA, on the owner's association. So we got a form for that. There's a vacation rental addendum. Depending on where you are in the state, you may be dealing with vacation properties down at the coast, up in the mountains, off of a lake, for example. I mean, Winston-Salem is fantastic, but let's face it, people are not vacationing here. So we don't deal much with vacation properties. So again, where you are or where you're moving, you obviously will get more information on that. But right now, just know that there's a vacation rental addendum that addresses the sale of that property. Probably one of the biggest things that this form says, and we see it again in another unit, can't remember now which one, but one of the bigger things this says is that the property is sold honoring any existing vacation rentals for like the first 6 months, 180 days. So if you're going to buy a vacation property, you got to honor those first 6 months. If you're buying it for a vacation property, then you already have those in the book. But if you want to buy it for your personal use, you got to honor those 6 months, 180 days. Short sale addendum. I'm not going to say too much about this right now because we're going to talk more about this in financing. And if time allows, we may even look at this form because this form does a really good job of explaining exactly what a short sale is. So right now, let's just know that a short sale, the seller is underwater, meaning they owe more than what you can sell it for. Remember our listing agreement, and we start asking for approximate balances, outstanding balances. And when they start adding up, first mortgage, second mortgage, third mortgage, fourth mortgage, when that starts adding up, then our little red flag needs to go up and make sure that the seller can afford to sell. If they can, if they're underwater, they may be eligible for a short sale. That's up to them and their primary lender. Again, talking more about that. But really, what this form does is it does create a contingency. And what that contingency says is that the seller can't sell unless they have approval to do the short sale from all lien holders. And if all of those lien holders agree to do a short sale, what they're agreeing to do is release their liens while not accepting everything they're owed. So they're agreeing to cut some losses here. Again, it's up to the lender. All the lenders have to agree to do it. It's a process. More on this in our financing units. But just now, know if we have a short sale addendum, it's because the property is in a potential short sale. Seller's underwater and they've talked to their lender. And then the last one we're going to mention is the backup contract addendum. So you or we are already under contract and another offer comes in. Remind me, which offers do we present to our sellers?
All.
All of them. But what if you're already under contract and an offer comes in? Do you have to present that to your seller? Yes. An offer is an offer is an offer. If you are under contract and an offer comes in, it should include a backup contract addendum. Seller and backup buyer negotiate the terms like they always do. None of that's changing. If I buy your house, I would do it at this purchase price and this due diligence and this earnest money and these are our dates and da-da-da-da-da. We negotiate the terms like we always do. Once it's accepted and we have a contract, that backup buyer is placed in a backup position. And should the primary buyer not close for any reason, the backup buyer automatically becomes the primary. So if they terminate during due diligence, for example, they terminate after due diligence, if they terminate 3 hours from settlement, that backup buyer becomes the primary. It's kind of funny to say this, but that buyer's kind of off the side, fingers crossed, hoping that the primary doesn't buy because they know they're next up. They know they're next in line. This form only allows us to have one backup buyer. We cannot have the backup to the backup and a backup to the backup to the backup. We have a primary and we have a backup.
I have a question about this. So what if your backup already placed another offer on a different house? I mean,
we probably need to get them to terminate this one before we do that, or soon immediately after.
Okay.
Now it comes down to date timestamp, right? Because as soon as this backup is notified that they're the primary, they're up. There is no renegotiation. I mean, they are up. So what if they get the call that they're up at the same time their other offer gets accepted? Now you got your buyer contractually obligated to buy 2 houses or 2 properties, and they got to terminate one, right? Which is going to put them in breach in one. So to protect them, we can only have one contract at a time. Due diligence and earnest money is part of these negotiations. This backup buyer does not owe due diligence until and if they become the primary. So if they never become the primary, then they don't owe that due diligence. They will go ahead and put up the earnest money. Remember, that's just hanging out in an escrow account showing their good faith. If they never become the primary, they'll get their earnest money back. They're just showing their good faith. What if the backup buyer is a better offer and the seller wants to terminate because this backup offer is better? We need to get the seller to talk to an attorney and talk about those consequences, because remember, the breach for seller, they could go after money, they could go after specific performance. So they need to understand, and the sellers, that's exactly what they're going to say. This offer is better, terminate this one and let's accept this one. Everybody simmer down. We need to sit down and read that paragraph to them. And if they still want to do it, like we said, it might be that it's cheaper for them to keep the contract they're in instead of terminate, accept the new one, because now they got a buyer that could come after them in court. So that's the job of the attorney. This form, I'm going to say, in this crazy market we're getting out of, this form came up a lot. Remember, 45 offers, right? The seller can only accept one, which means the other 44 got rejected, right? And one of those buyers may want to put themselves in a backup position. Some sellers will consider these, some sellers will not. All we can do is have these conversations when this comes in, presenting that offer. And as I've mentioned, we are the industry of paperwork. So there's so many other forms, you guys, we're just scratching surfaces. I got a form for repair requests, agreed upon repair request, which is called due diligence agreement, an amendment. They just changed the name a couple of years ago. I think it's due diligence agreement and amendment now, something like that. There's negotiation forms we can use. We got one, I think this one's mentioned in your book, called response to buyer's offer. Maybe it's not. But anyway, response to buyer's offer, the seller can communicate with the buyer about how they want to respond to their offer. We have many termination forms, termination with release of earnest money, termination without release of earnest money. There's an old joke at the commission. And the punchline is, we got a form for that, because there's a really good chance they got a form for that. Let me ask you guys, what if we don't? What if they don't have a pre-printed form for that? What do we do?
I would say.
Contact a lawyer and have him draw one up.
Absolutely. Call your attorney. Thank you all of you for not saying, well, I could do that, can I? No. If we don't have a pre-printed form for this situation, then we need to get in touch with the buyer's or seller's attorney to draft one up for us. We can never draft legally binding documents, but they have many situations covered. Let's see, will buyers ever know that there have been about 40 plus offers placed with property, or does that have to be written permission from the seller to disclose? We're going to talk about multiple offers on Thursday. And one thing we're going to learn is that the presence of multiple offers is not a material fact. It's up to the seller if we disclose. I still can't lie, but whether or not we disclose that we have multiple offers, that's up to the seller. It's not a material fact. But I'm telling you right now, that market a couple of years ago when the pendulum was way up here, yeah, there were multiple offers. But now we're getting down into normal. But yeah, there is not a material fact. Some sellers will want to share that information. Buyers are going to go one of two ways when they find out there's other offers. They're going to either bring their A game to the table, or they're going to run away. So sellers need to realize that if we disclose there are multiple offers, we might lose a buyer or two. But again, the last couple of years, you were dealing with multiple offers. There was really no way around that. We're still dealing with multiple offers today, but it's not as much, still in certain price points.
So if the seller doesn't want to disclose and the buyer asks if there are other offers, what do you recommend we say?
My seller does not wish to disclose that. I can't say yes, I can't say no, because I got to follow my seller's instructions, right? So my honest answer is, my seller doesn't want to say one way or the other. Big forms night tonight, you guys. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I know this is not the fun part of real estate, but understand this is such a big part of real estate. Nothing we can do about it. I need you guys to all promise me right here and right now, as future real estate agents, you will never, ever, ever send a form to a client or a customer without you reading it first, without you looking it over. Everybody promise me, pinky swear me, promise me you will never, because guess what? If you don't understand it, if you have a question about it, Remember, we're helping them understand these forms. So it's not like you're going to say, oh, it's fine, I'm short, just sign it. No, we need to make sure that we're reading these forms before we deal with them. If you have any questions, you got your BIC, you got peers in your firm, you got resources. When you guys come to see me in post licensing, you're going to get a real estate manual, which, as you can see, is just about as big as your pre-licensing book. So you have, now your couch will be level, right? You got both legs propped up, but you get the manual. So you have a guide. You have access to various memberships. You know, once you guys are members of North Carolina Association of Realtors, it comes with a legal hotline, part of your membership dues. So you can email or call an attorney. My point is the resources are out there. Another one of my super simple philosophies. When in doubt, find out. I'm done with forms for the most part. So Thursday, we're going to finish Unit 10. Your midterm is ready to go. You don't have access to it yet. That's turning on Friday morning. So we'll talk about the midterm and what that's going to look like. I have my meeting tomorrow about the new venue. So we'll be able to talk about your application process. We'll be able to talk about that on Thursday. And then we'll probably even get started on our financing unit. So if you're looking ahead, up next is 14 and 15. So we'll probably get started on those as well. 10, what I say, 10 midterm, relink. Yeah, and we'll get started on 14.
How many days do we have to take the midterm?
A week. I'm asking you guys for like 2 hours and 7 days. Is that fair? I hope you can give me 2 hours and 7 days. If not, I have very serious concerns about how much study time you're not putting it in. Can we take the midterm more than once? Nope. So one and done. Again, we'll talk all about it on Thursday. Jot your questions down in case I don't cover them, but there's a good chance I will. I know this is the first time you guys are taking a midterm, but I've been around. So we will get you through it. What else? Yes. All right. You guys have a good rest of your evening. Have a good day tomorrow. See you Thursday night. We keep pointing forward, don't we?